Hello, everyone. Hi. So we are live, and I actually have Allison with us. Hey, Allison. Nope, I can't hear you. Let me just check something here. I've got a setting off. I didn't have you on earlier, so I couldn't. Hang on one second here. There we, there we go. Okay, one second. Oh, sorry, guys. I just a little housekeeping here. Until I have everybody on, I don't know what's going on. So for some reason. So if you're watching online, if you hear any issues, if you're able to hear me or not hear me or whatever, just give me a heads up. That way I know. Okay. Allison. Hey. Okay. For some reason I can't hear you. One second. And I don't know. This thing's acting up very strangely. Oh, there we go. Okay. Now we got you. Sorry, guys. Little. I haven't done one of these live streams in a while, so I'm like a little. Also, I'm hearing myself, which is ridiculous. I don't know why it's playing back to me because I should have. So, anyways, I'll just. Um. So this is going to be distracting. One second. One second. I'm hearing myself repeat. It's. I'm trying to get this to turn off. I don't know why it's. Sorry, guys. It should have. It should be set up that way, but for some reason it's not. Master. Oh my god. Okay, so I'll just when I talk, I'm gonna take my headphones off. Okay.
I can hear you
So
too. I think everybody can hear. Like
what?
Jason, I can hear both things. I can hear both things going on too.
Okay.
I don't know if
Okay.
everybody can.
Oh, okay. One second. All right. Let me try something. I so strange. It's like duplicate. You know what, Allison? I'm gonna just send you a new link because I've never had this happen before. I'm just gonna send you a fresh link. So jump off and come back on. Sorry, everybody. We'll get this figured out. It was something to do with the call there. It was a feedback loop. It was a weird feedback loop. We'll get Allison back here. Hey, Allison. Did that fix it? No, nothing. Okay, hold on. Let me put you. No. Okay, hold on. Can you hear me now? How about now? Allison, can you hear me? Hello? I don't know what's going on here. No, Allison can't hear me. Sorry, everyone. Okay, I'm going to put something else on the screen here. But no, maybe not. I'm sorry, Allison. I don't know what the heck is going on here. You know what? I'm just going to play the video, everyone, and then we'll come back at the end, and hopefully I'll have this figured out.
I can't hear anything. I can't hear anything.
Okay. Gotcha. I hear you. I hear you, Allison. Okay.
Doing independent research. My name is Allison McDowell, and I'm a mom. I live in Philadelphia. I spend a lot of time doing independent research and following money. And a lot of my work as an activist started out around the privatization of public schools in Philadelphia, which was sort of, I used to just be a mom that would help volunteer in the schools, and I work half-time, and so I do have a chunk of time to devote to other things, and that's a great privilege. And so initially I was just working to support my child's neighborhood school, and eventually in 2013, Boston Consulting Group recommended for the closure of about 23 schools in the city, and it threw everything into upheaval, laid off 3,000 teachers, and was really devastating for the district, for the educators, for the families who are kind of coming to grips with that. And then later that summer, that happened in the spring, the district hired a consultant to come in and start pitching this idea of school report cards, grading schools, and it would impact the regular public schools and not the charter schools. And so we sort of organized in opposition to that. That work was underwritten by the Dell Foundation. Michael Dell, Dell Computers works with a major contractor to the NSA. and so those public meetings were shut down. And so in response, I sort of jumped into working with education activists around opposing standardized testing. And so that was sort of my first big effort. And I was coordinated actually with a national group, because this was happening nationally at the time through United Opt-out, and Peggy Robertson, who's actually based in Colorado. And so we connected sort of this loose coalition of parents who were trying to oppose the use of both the standardization of education curriculum as well as the weaponization of scores against schools to close schools. And I did that for a while, but then realized that really the end game was shifting more towards all the time data collection on students through educational technology. So then my focus shifted towards looking into the ed tech as a global industry and what it meant for both surveillance of content delivered in the classroom, the commodification of children as data, and then again the use of the data collected to further privatize public education. So a lot of that work, I blogged at wrenchinthegears.com. That's the blog that I have. And over time, I realized that really, even though I had come into it through public education, that this issue of commodifying people as data and doing the sort of digital control and disciplinary mechanisms was really part of a much larger global financial apparatus. And one of the parents that I organized with is Sherry Honkala. Our kids were in the same school at the same time, and she has been doing work around housing rights and rights of the poor, organizing the poor for decades, and doing really amazing work outside the system. So we connected, and then my lens just expanded much more broadly, that this wasn't simply about controlling public schools and children and families and educators, but it was really about creating systemic global poverty and then managing that. So that's sort of how I came into things. So now it's gone from poverty management to pandemic, which is creating poverty. Just keeps getting bigger.
What did you say, the weaponization of data? What do you mean by that?
Well, so Eric Schmidt, former chair, I believe, of Alphabet, Google's parent company, has said, data is the new oil. And I think that's sort of this common understanding at this point that, we're reaching peak petroleum. This next extractive resource is data. And a lot of the data in the world, increasingly as we smart up with sensors and things, our environment, and even like our phones are just a very basic sensor mechanism. Our interactions with devices, with sensors embedded in the built environment, amongst sensors, that's all generating data. And the entities that can capture and analyze that data have tremendous power. One of the things that I got into when I was working in the education front, so ultimately, when I was doing testing, I realized that wasn't the answer. That wasn't going to be, withholding the test wasn't going to be the thing to stop it, because then they moved into this technology. So the lesson I learned at that point was, like, they would like for you to do the work for them to their end. Like, you have to think a couple steps ahead, because they have like a 20 or 30 year plan. And if they can give you a little lead on a controlled opposition, even though you may not understand that that's what you're doing, like, they'll let you advance their agenda to a certain point. And so I didn't want that to happen again. And what I saw happening was there was a huge organization around data privacy, student data privacy. And while I'm very much in support of the premise of data privacy, for me, the larger philosophical context is they would like for us to ask to become digital commodities. Like, those in power would like to offer us privacy in exchange for having our life turned into data so that they can extract value from that. But it has to be a mutual agreement that we will agree to be a data commodity. And so it's sort of a false choice around data privacy, that we will get privacy, but then essentially it won't stop the educational technology. It won't stop telemedicine. It won't stop teletherapy. We'll still have to live in a digital world, but somehow we can sell ourselves as data. And so when I talk about weaponization, like, there are subtle nuances. They like to frame the argument in certain ways. And while I probably lean Luddite, at this point, a lot of the educational process that I do with people is through digital. Like, I'm not saying like it's easy to completely walk away from it, but I'm trying to say that living in a world of data is a world of sort of binary decision trees that are only a shadow of the actual world and a shadow of actual relationships. And by buying into that, we're allowing ourselves to live in their apparatus that they have constructed. Like, Google builds a really nice box. It's got a lot of bells and whistles. It's fun. It can do things. We can share stuff. But ultimately, it's Google's box. So we're not going to be able to conceive of things outside of Google's box if we decide to live there. And so these are questions. I don't tell people how to think about it, but these are the things I think about. And this data, so that's the commodification piece. The other piece is a book that was really influential for me is Yasha Levine's book, Surveillance Valley, and it's a military history of the internet. And if you understand the internet as a militarized space, it puts a very different spin on things. And if you understand that is both this intersection of the corporate state and the militarist state, and sort of potentially predatory philanthropy are all operating in this digital space that feels really cool, but also has a lot of risks that people are not aware of if you don't know the historical context. And you have to consider the power and who actually, in a cloud computing world, even though we'd like to imagine it's decentralized with blockchain and different things, the people who are in control of the cloud, it's a very small number of people, mostly a lot of white guys, not exclusively, but that power is highly concentrated. And to operate in that space means to operate in their world.
You said something a minute ago that I thought was interesting. Predatory philanthropy. So you want to tell me a little bit about, like, what do you mean by predatory philanthropy?
Wealth around the world is concentrated in the hands of these billionaires, right, who are making all of this money, even under the present circumstances of the COVID situation. They all have very large philanthropic pieces. They can use those assets to influence public policies that benefit their companies as well. Additionally, so within a foundation, there's two elements to it. There's PRI and MRI. So there's the endowment money, and then there's the money that they distribute in grants. So Bill Gates, even within his philanthropy, his endowment of the Gates Foundation is invested in for-profit prisons. I mean, many very problematic things that those philanthropic monies are invested in to create these assets that then can be distributed in grants that are used to influence public policy in ways that are disproportionate to the general public. They can use these monies to put them into nonprofit institutions that are then, even though they may not feel it directly, somewhat obligated to comply with the wishes of the funders. And there's a good book that says, the revolution will not be funded. If you are proposing a radical solution that would redistribute power away from this handful of people that maintain all of the power, they're not going to fund you. So if we have a general understanding that the issues in the world are these issues of domination that are exerted by corporate interests, transnational global capital interests largely, who are operating like even beyond a national context, that's where the power is. And anything that threatens that power will be cut off. So there's this idea that through grants and things, you can sort of have the cardboard check, glittery gala, feel good, pat on the back, doing good work. But the reality is that many of these companies are making profits off of the misery of the global populace. And if we actually redistributed resources in a way to ameliorate poverty, their businesses would be harmed. So we've got sort of these global poverty management complexes that are run through well-meaning, often nonprofits, but are limited by the fact that they're funded by entities that have no real desire for poverty and immiseration to end. I mean, also Bill Gates is funding like GMO seeds. Like he's funding the privatization of public education. There are many elements of these policies that might be something that one individual person feels is good for everyone else, but many people realize it's a huge problem. So again, that's one person who's exerting disproportionate influence over the lives of millions of people. And it's very hard to, we didn't elect Bill Gates to anything. We didn't. And there's no way to get at Bill Gates or at Eric Schmidt or at New America or at these think tanks. There's no way to get at them because at this point, and I don't know, it goes back very far in terms of influence, but the government is operating with these partners in sort of shadowy back corners in a way that the general public will never get to. We'll never get those invitations to Davos. We'll never know. We're not meant to know what goes on there. And those aren't people we can elect out.
So what's interesting about this is people that I know who are all about democracy and representation and government and government by the people, the idea of government, not necessarily the actual reality of it, are also the same people that support Bill Gates and these, they're benevolent and as a force of good, and there's a disconnect there because on one hand, they're cheerleading the idea of a democracy while celebrating this incredibly undemocratic setup,
Yeah.
arrangement.
I mean, for me, like I said, my entry point was in through the public schools. And I could see the grave harm that was being done. And I mean, I give Bill Gates credit. He actually has all of his grants on his website, right? So you can go in and in different project areas, look and see the hundreds of millions of dollars going into all sorts of things. Now, my scope up until recently wasn't looking at their global health initiatives, right? Like I was looking at schools, which was big enough. It was a huge, and even like trying to scratch the surface of global health and vaccine programs and other things, there's just whole other elements that open up. But money is power, and that money and power is very concentrated. So I would say if you go to any of the major foundations and you start to peel back where their grants are from, you can see how they can control things. Hewlett-Packard is an entity that very few people, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, it's not really one of those top ones that you hear, pointed out. But they're very influential. Essentially, they have restructured the nonprofit industry to be data-driven, to run these human capital markets that are coming. And so I spent a good couple months just essentially entering all the data around these grants to nonprofits into this database system so that I could track it. And you could see this is how they bought all of the identity politics organizations. This is how they bought all of the philanthropic news media. This is how they bought, all of the online giving programs. And so you can actually map it by mapping the money, and the nature of it appears. And there are so many people who tell me, Allison, this isn't coordinated. There can't be a place where everyone's planning this out. And I'm like, no, there is. It's Davos, it's Necker Island. There are groups of people who are at this high level who maybe they don't all have all the parts, but they definitely have the overall strategy of what the plan is. And they have like a 20 to 30 year, maybe 50-year plan of how this is going to roll out. And then they have backup plans depending on what the resistance is. So yes, it isn't conspiracy. It's not hidden if you actually spend the time to look at the money, which is what I do, and which is why I'm not just taking somebody else's word for it. I'm actually looking at what they're saying in their white papers, in their grant projects, in their boards, and seeing how it's playing out in the real world. The resistance will not come from the middle class.
No,
at the beginning, it certainly won't. It's going to come from the people who have been systematically, who are, if we can get to a point that people's basic needs are met enough that they can collectively resist. To try to convince the middle class of what's happening, most people, I'm not a normal person.
right.
For whatever reason. I saw this and I can't walk away from it.
Yeah.
So, but that's not most people.
I think, was it impact investing that kind of got you kind of like seeing beyond just, it's just beyond just like the standardized testing or whatever. What was kind of the next step for you?
I'm trying to remember how I first got to looking at pay for success. One of my mentors, his name is Tim Scott, wrote a couple of pieces that touched on social impact bond finance. And this was at the time where I was looking into educational technology, and Gates was sort of part of that. There's a very compelling presentation I recommend to everyone online, and it's Justin Leroy, who I believe is an academic, a professor at UC Santa Barbara now, it was about social impact bonds and the afterlife of slavery. And what was really interesting was the context of that talk. So there was an exhibit at the Whitney, I'm trying to remember the exact year, maybe 2016, where Cameron Rowland, who's actually a Philadelphia artist, he does work around found objects and ready-made, and in relation to the carceral state and racial capitalism, and that's sort of his work. And so this was an exhibit around debt, and he had used his apportionment to make art to actually buy a share in this social impact bond, which was targeting incarcerated youth in Ventura County, which is interesting because that's one of the county that's coming up with the COVID stuff now. And so he bought he bought, and then because that was the only way to get the terms of this social impact bond conference and contract, and he framed it and he put it on the wall of the Whitney. And he asked Justin Leroy to come and speak as part of the exhibit. And so this talk was given, and it really sort of hit home that what we're looking at now with the turning of people into data and using predictive analytics to essentially set up these larger systems to gamble on people's lives. And this is something that's happening as a direct result of automation of labor and sort of globalized labor management processes. This is the outgrowth of the carceral state. This is what's coming next, are these social impact finance tied to different forms of state control that are outside of prison systems, but also really brutal, was that it's this legacy, it's this arc on which our nation is built, and which I think is below the surface in many ways. And I think people who are, tend to sort of say, rely on the constitutional rights and, the good of democracy, often conveniently sort of forget that the wealth and power of this country was built on land theft of the indigenous nations and genocide of indigenous people and enslavement of Black people and family separation of those families, and then unfree labor and forced labor, like up until very recently. And so those pieces, when we sort of go back to the Constitution, don't apply. And the Constitution is really written to protect the property rights of powerful white men. And many of which founding fathers were real estate speculators. So where we are now with Trump is very much part of that larger trajectory. And so that is why, for me, understanding human capital finance and understanding that it is embedded in the way in which we were so brutal to Indigenous people and Black people is central to understanding, like, now this system has gotten to the point that it's coming after everyone. And we need to both reconcile with that history and really own it, and also to look to those ongoing resistance strategies to enslavement as we move forward and try to come to some resolution and be allies in that process, if that makes sense. I mean, that's my personal understanding and the framing of it. But
and the challenge here is this issue is just splinters off into so many other things.
I know.
As you were talking, no, it's okay. As you were talking, I was thinking about some of the things that he was saying in his talk about insurance and seeing humans as commodities that can be discarded or kept, or that's even an option.
Right, it's the commodification of humanity. And that's what's really interesting, because there's another academic, Calvin Schermerhorn, who has a really good talk about supply chains and supply chains, commodity chains and supply chains, about looking at the finance, the innovative banking that was associated with the transportation, the brutal relocation of Black enslaved people from the Chesapeake Bay area into sugar plantations. And that at the time, in the early 19th century, there wasn't a common currency, and the ways in which Northern finance played this intermediary process in terms of making these financial trades happen. And so moving forward, I feel very strongly that blockchain, this idea of the trusted third party, is going to be replacing in an automated way these sort of Northern financiers and in these human capital bonds that are going to be coming online through these central banking systems. And I don't really think that the people at Wharton and Stanford are looking at 18th century bank finance around the domestic slave trade, but it's very eerie at how close it is that these patterns, these cycles keep coming back. And there's a term that I would encourage people to look up that really helps me think about it. It's called hypothecation, and that was in Calvin Schermerhorn's, this idea of being able to draw capital out of human bodies while the person who owns them still maintains use of that body. So like mortgaging against humanity while still controlling that humanity. And I think that's going to be something that's going to be key moving forward with these pay-for-success deals and these human capital bonds, is hypothecation.
I've never heard that term. What are the arguments they make for this? Why, it seems if I were to listen to you, I'd be like, wow, that sounds like a terrible idea. We shouldn't do that. So why do you think it connects with people, or why do you think what are the arguments that they make that are, that we should be doing this, or is it just because it's all done behind the scenes, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the human capital finance mechanism that's I believe will probably be likely to roll out in the aftermath of sort of this global economic reset. They pitch UBI, Universal Basic Income, as this. They've been sort of preparing the ground for that for the past few years. And, I think they want people to believe there's no strings attached to that, or they're just giving you like a suitcase of cash, $1,000. It's not going to be that. It'll be tied to digital currency. And within that, like very much conditioned on how you can use that money. And within blockchain systems, there are ways of actually programming money through tokens. You can use this amount for rent. You can move this amount for food. It really is very limiting. I would say this idea of universal basic income or blockchain identity or decentralized, like you can become your own data commodity. There's part of it that is very appealing to sort of the traditional American mindset. Like if you just curate your own brand, like you can beat out all of the other people on the block to be the most desirable data commodity out there, and everyone will clamor to, and that's, the YouTuber culture, these online celebrity cultures, is that it's all about this digital branding. But the reality is that the resources are still concentrated in the hands of these few powerful people. They're not giving us any more of their money. In fact, they're using these systems to further concentrate their wealth and power and impose austerity at the bottom level. So I think in one way they want to sell this American dream of bootstrapping and just for the digital age. And if you're just really good, you can, if you're really disciplined and you're really good, you can make it work. Even though they control the structural apparatus and you're working within their structure, even if it's ostensibly, decentralized. And that's appealing for a lot of people. A lot of people just want to be free operators. They don't want to feel like they have obligations to other people or part of these larger webs networks. For me, it feels like there's the digital life, which is sort of an anti-life status, and then there's the real life, which is messy but also powerful. And so we're sort of diverging. There's the people who are taking the cyborg track of living in the virtual world, and then people who are resisting the cyborg track. And I don't know how it's going to all play out, because it's hard, because increasingly they're pushing everybody into the cyborg track. And if you want to live outside of that, live not with a digital payment system, live not with a digital identity, it's hard to imagine where that can happen. And that's why I'm trying to connect with people who are also trying to imagine how that could happen, because I think there are a lot of people who, given a choice, wouldn't want that.
Mm-hmm. So what evidence do you have that UBI will have strings attached? Because it sounds to me like, I'm being devil's advocate here. This is a great thing. We're going to help everybody out. We're going to give them money, and it'll keep the economy going. And
beware beginnings. They always give you they dangle the stuff free, and then they change up the terms later. So there's something called the Better Than Cash Alliance. Gates is backing it, and MasterCard, and a number of sort of larger credit. They're pushing global digital payment systems. And if you understand how sort of capital works, it's predicated on continued growth. And within these digital spaces, faster and smaller and more atomized and fast, everything speeds up. Everything grows and everything has to speed up. And so these blockchain payments, blockchain allows, the way they pitch it is that it allows the micro payments, tiny fractions of a penny, and it's fast and instantaneous, even though it isn't quite there yet. But this is how they're imagining that this will be at some point. These sort of immediate cross-border payment systems, and we're all part of this globalized world. And I think, while I definitely feel solidarity with people around the world, I think we can all agree that globalization and structural adjustment has been horrible for people around the world. So there are issues around globalized payment systems, especially when they're controlled by global creditors and global financial banks and the World Bank. So the Better Than Cash Alliance, and I've done some write-ups on them, but one of the reports specifically says we need government to jumpstart this. We can't do it on our own to get this global digital payment system. So we think the toe in the door is like government to people payments. And so if you can start creating governments issuing payments to citizens, like that's what's going to get it going. I believe very strongly that the phones that are given to low-income people are to make that possible, because a lot of those cash assistance benefits will be digitally platformed, and that's going in that direction. And there has been a big push over the past few years to make sure like all low-income people have a smartphone, which again, I'm not against. I'm not trying to restrict people's access to that, but in order for this new program of human capital work, people have to have their digital surveillance device and they have to have their benefits on a phone. So they need a phone. That's the cost of this model moving forward. So Gates is involved in something called Moja Loop, and they're trying out different things with I think heating assistance in Bangladesh. They've got different pilots in different parts of the world. And I think a lot of times people who are in comfortable situations would just see like, oh, that's in that other country. That doesn't have any relevance to me. But what we have to understand is in a world of cloud-based computing, once they have the architecture set up, like they can just upload that and it can be in any country within a week, really. Once they have the pilot online and they're comfortable that it works, it is cross-border. There isn't really anything to limit that. So, So like I said, Better Than Cash is already working on that. We're seeing things come up with the digital dollar and the digital wallets that were tried to slip in with the COVID payments that got back down, but I'm sure it'll pop back up again. In Australia, they're actually putting their disability benefits on blockchain with tokens and using programmable money. So if you look up programmable money and blockchain, it's a thing. And I really don't, maybe a tiny bit of UBI would be totally unconditional. But these systems of power want to exert more and more control because ultimately their goal is to engineer behavior. And this is tied, and I haven't spoken to this yet, but the pay for success finance structure and turning people into data and then engineering them on dashboards, sort of representing their life and their behaviors on a dashboard to gamble on for global markets. They need to continue to exert more and more control so they can get more and more data so they can do more and more of these deals.
What is programmable money?
I know you know a lot about money. So my sense is that the concept of currency is about to undergo a very big change. And the idea of fiat currency is going to change, and that these tokens, which are represented, in blockchain, like Ethereum smart contracts, are assets, any kinds of assets that you can ascribe onto this digital item that can be transferred. And it's almost limitless, the types of assets you can assign to a token. And a lot of this is linked to virtual world building and gaming economies, like virtual reality, video gaming economies, these ideas of leveling up and scoring and securing items, digital items that might unlock other things, privileges and things. So programmable money is like having assets that are assigned only a certain use. Like you can only use this token to do this thing. And it's trackable. It's on this ledger, so it can be tracked over time and used to both to profile people and make decisions about people. Essentially, it's tracking actions in the world on a ledger. And I think assigning value to that action that is trackable. So one of the things I do, I'm a real geek, sometimes you do a lot of work and you don't know where you're going to find the thing that unlocks the next important thing that you discover, right? And so New America had a couple years ago, I think, a whole day event on blockchain with the World Bank. Okay, so it was like sitting through 4 hours of the World Bank discussions on blockchain. But it was really helpful to understand, and a lot of this was linked to global aid systems, because a lot of these systems are being piloted through global aid channels through USAID and UKAID, ostensibly to sort of, ensure transparency and tracking of this aid product. But one of the individuals in the presentation was from an organization called Trust Lab, and they had done a proof of concept in Cape Town, South Africa, to create a blockchain identity system for pre-K children. And so the premise in this program, which is this pilot, which is underway, is that there would be sort of this corporate franchise childcare program. The government would reimburse providers, but it was based on attendance. And so what they told all of the service providers was that you weren't going to do it on paper anymore, that we were going to have an app, and that every child would be assigned a unique identifier, a digital identity, and all the teachers would be, and the school would be, and it would all be tracked on this app, which is a very simple transaction, but it would be a token. So whenever the child attended pre-K that day, this blockchain token was transferred, an impact token, and then there would be a government reimbursement to the provider. The thing is, there were this third piece in there of investors in the pre-K program. And these are social impact investors and human capital investors. And we have to understand that pre-K would fall under the UN Sustainability Development Goal number 4, which is education. So impact investors are investing their money in these human capital assets that manifest as pre-K. And so this transactional data, which they are getting a payout for if you can improve the human capital quality of these children through delivering this evidence-based pre-K program, is knit into their global financial returns. But essentially then that child becomes a mechanism within this larger global financial apparatus, and their behavior of showing up to pre-K and enabling these blockchain tokens to transfer, both to pay the service provider and document for the impact investment, that's what I'm talking about, tokens. So there's a value element in there, but it's not looking like a dollar or a euro or anything that we would traditionally conceive of as a payment. It's behavior tracked through tokens that will unlock a future payment that is agreed upon maybe in some financial contract somewhere.
So someone that would support this would say, yeah, but what's the problem? We're getting Wall Street to suddenly care about this success of young people.
Yeah.
So what would you say to that? They say, well, whereas before they didn't care, now they can you're actually incentivizing them to care about the success. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, no. I mean,
what would you say to that?
Essentially what we've created is a world where, again, this wealth is concentrated, and the people with the most money and the most wealth will continue to make even more based on immiserating the broad people. This system isn't set up to eliminate poverty, because what they've created is a global market in managing poverty. So it will never eliminate poverty. Goldman Sachs has no incentive to eliminate poverty if they're making a good 7 to 11% rate of return on poverty, right? You might ameliorate it, you might make it less brutal, but you don't actually stop it. And so what this looks like, there's a social impact bond, a pre-K social impact bond. One of the first ones was in Salt Lake City, and this is all connected through also the United Way. They're a major partner in this. And so they developed an impact program for pre-K in the Salt Lake area. And what was done was they agreed to screen several hundred children for those that would be good qualifying impact, opportunity kids. And then they gave them access to pre-K that was underwritten by Goldman Sachs. And of the 100 kids that ended up getting the pre-K program, and I'm not sure if it was 1 or 2 years, only one of them, so the cost offset was special education. And they had assigned a cost of how costly special education would be for children, and say, oh, well, if you give them pre-K, they won't need special education later. And we're going to save all this money by not needing to deliver special education, which is kind of a bogus argument that they're necessarily connected. So of these 100 kids that got the pre-K program, which was a pretty bare bones program, only one of them, when they enrolled in kindergarten, qualified for special education. And Goldman Sachs netted a whole bunch of money off of that. So I know through my work in education that you can game any numbers and data to make your case. And so what happens is that the impact metrics for these deals are set such that they're scalable, they're narrow, and they're going to advantage the investor. And then you can play around with the numbers. You can push kids out, you can push kids in, you can do things to make the numbers look like you want them to work. And that's the same that's always happened with charter schools and test scores and everything else. They're there to be manipulated. So of those 100 kids and only one got screened into special education, you have to wonder, and this was even in the New York Times, questioning these impact metrics. Did they screen kids in who never would have needed special education? Like maybe they were, English was not their first language and they just needed time to catch up on English? Like they weren't gonna need special education. Were these kids who did need special education and aren't gonna get it because it's disincentivized? You know, are they getting denied services because it would disadvantage Goldman Sachs to get those services? And so there are huge questions around what this means. And then even within Amply, and this program is backed by UNICEF, they're framing it as giving a child a chance to build their social capital. Well, that's a really messed up situation when essentially what you're saying is, like, we know how racialized these systems are already, is that, you know, this child is already pre-profiled as a potential burden on society. Before they've even, you know, they're 3 years old and they're already a potential burden on society. We've decided, our data analytics have decided, based on your zip code, your parents, your genomics eventually, you're a burden. You're our burden and we'll fix that burden. It's incredibly paternalistic. And so what we need is a society where the resources are not all locked up in these mega transnational global capital entities that are not accountable to anyone, underwriting systems that are very narrow. Because the other piece of this is it's not just sort of stripped down in-person pre-K. They're also developing online pre-K. And this is Waterford Upstart. This is being used in the city of Philadelphia right now on refugee families. They're pushing poor kids, refugee kids, into online preschool because it's an impact market. It's a data profiling market. These kids don't have a chance to say no thank you. I'd prefer not to have a digital identity. I prefer not to be your data commodity. It's incredibly predatory, and there are a lot of ethical questions about that. I mean, the other piece is they need new ways of getting data. And this is the pre-K program particularly is based on something called the Heckman equation. Jim Heckman at the University of Chicago, economics, he's a Nobel Prize winning economist, developed this equation setting the return on investment, which is 7 to 13% if you include health impacts on pre-K. It was paid for, but underwritten by J.B. Pritzker, who's the governor of Illinois now. So they've created this equation, and what they've said is, we can't shift the data for pre-K. We can't make the numbers work for cognitive skills. Like IQ hardens up at the age of 10, it doesn't work for the hedge funds. Like that doesn't work. We don't have enough movement on the data dashboards to make that work, to get our ROI. We can manipulate character. That's what we can manipulate. We can move character data on a dashboard. And this is these Ocean 5 big personality traits, and then we can do that digitally through gamification. So what that looks like is there's something called Hatch. I'm sure there are many of these, but Hatch Education has something called a We Play Smart table. And I mean, and this is real. It is a large play table. If you imagine like a big screen TV flat, on two sides of the display are fisheye lens cameras. And the children are supposed to come together to play at this table, like moving puzzle pieces and things, where the cameras track their social behaviors. Their social behaviors, not just how they're personal, but how they interact with others, and are scored. And that is the data that drives these impact deals. And I confronted the woman who was in charge of this with Goldman Sachs with the flyer. I went to the Dirksen Senate building when they were all celebrating what's called the Social Impact Partnerships Pay for Results Act. And they had a big, champagne toast over finally getting this passed, this seed money to start these impact markets. And I had to, I'm a mom, and I'm just like, I might not be able to stop this, but I'm going to show up and tell you I know what's happening, and it's not okay. And I had my little half-sheet flyer with the hatched surveillance play tables, and I said, this is wrong. You don't put at-risk kids on a surveillance play table to profit Goldman Sachs. It's evil, actually. And say we're going to brainwash kids, essentially, for profit. It's not, if you understand it within a historic context, like clearly we've always done that to certain communities, to certain people's children. Like we have. Like I'm not acting shocked that this is happening, but like I felt compelled to show up and like with my little half sheet paper and say like, I know what you're doing. Like I'm bearing witness to this, that it's not okay. And I'm hoping maybe more people will know about it because it's shocking. If you see the Hatch We Play Smart table, you will be shocked to see it, that it's real. And that it actually, I have confirmation. So I went to Tulsa in January. There's centers where this is rolling out. Dallas, this is the Federal Reserve is part of a lot of this, the Dallas Fed. I visited Dallas and Tulsa. Tulsa is a target of a lot of this rollout. And they have something called EduCare, and this is going to be run through these EduCare franchise programs. And they're already using the We Play Smart tables in EduCare in Tulsa. And I intervened at one of these impact events, these events where they were celebrating, patting each other on the back over their impact, investing opportunities. And again, calling them out, just like with my banner saying, kids are not impact investments. And I had confirmation from this is coming through something called Strive Together. They have collective impact programs all across the country. And they were like, I'm like, do you know about Amply, like digital identity? Do you know about these smart play tables? And they're like, well, of course. Like, I'm in education, of course I know about the smart tables.
So how does this affect the relationship between the student and the teacher and the child and the parent?
I mean, so this is something that I've been struggling with. And again, we're all sort of on this uneven ground is what is the world we want for our kids, right? And so on the one hand, there's what does it mean to parent? What does it mean to have time to care for your kids? There's a whole argument around affordable childcare. Well, what if it means affordable childcare means your kid's on a surveillance play table? What kind of world are we creating that you have to have two full-time parents, maybe each working 2 jobs to sustain a family so your kid can be on a surveillance play table for Goldman Sachs? These are these larger questions. And I'm not sitting here saying any one parent should forego their, having a satisfying career to do this work, but I think we really have to balance what corporate childcare, what franchise childcare means when it's starting to come with these predictive analytics and data analytics systems. We know kids shouldn't be on screens. We know behaviorally profiling, because it's not just that We Play Smart tables, they have these other little tablets that they're collecting all this data from. So increasingly the teachers, and this is not just in pre-K, but in K-12 and higher, are supposed to be data managers. The kids interact with devices, and then the teachers queue up playlists under the pretense of personalized learning. And it's a consumer-based model. As the teacher, I will queue up your 30 resources that you are to consume, digital resources, and then I will track your engagement with those resources. And then I will prepare your next playlist of items. And then every kid gets something different. And then increasingly, the teachers won't even be running the playlist, it will be AI. Increasingly that's what IBM is about, is that you are optimized through artificial intelligence. And I guess the question is, to what end, right? Do certain types of people get optimized to certain pathways? Because clearly with this fourth industrial revolution that's happening, the premise is that most people are going to be dispossessed out of their jobs. So if you start profiling kids at the age of 3 at the surveillance play table and putting them in feedback loops, digital feedback loops that maybe they're not even aware they're in, essentially you can control their future. And it might not even be, clearly even existing schools have always, I mean, we have to understand that compulsory education has been about social reproduction for the purposes of industry, right? It is to reinforce race and class and to stratify people and separate people into different groups. Like, I'm not under any, dream that isn't the truth. I mean, that is the function of compulsory education. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive to do better. And my question is once you put people isolated on devices, you lose knowledge sharing, right? Like you break community bonds. You have no space in which to collectively build something different. Essentially, your world is limited to what the digital interface says you have access to. I mean, we know even now within like what's going on with social media censorship around hot topics, if they don't want you to have the information, it will just be taken off.
And it's kind of wild, the ability to rewrite history in real time.
Yeah.
Is a trip.
What was it in 1984? The whole when you rewrote the history and you put it in the burn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Last summer, I listened to the audiobook of that again, and I was like, "Wow, so much of this is so relevant." Like,
it's super, yeah.
I
don't know.
One of the things people say too is, "Well, this is just you can't stop technology. This is just all inevitable, and you can't beat them. You might as well join them." And what do you say to some of those arguments?
Well, so I've been well, I guess it's understanding the long game, right? And there's part of me that's like, this has been planned out for maybe 70 years or so, like since post-World War II. Cybernetics, this cyborg future. And they haven't quite done it yet. So is that comforting or is that not comforting? I'm like, does that mean it's almost here or that it's not ever going to get here? The thing that has really hit me within this past month is understanding that turning people into data isn't simply about surveillance. It isn't simply about extracting profit from people as managing them as data. Is that extracting data from people is meant to feed machine learning systems. That there are groups of people who know that they intend to catalyze the singularity with this data, to actually create a future of sentient, general artificial intelligence beyond the control of people. And so this is something that I'm trying to come to grips with now. And I've known for a while, one of the big rabbit holes I fell down in doing education research was something called the Global Education Futures Forum, which was led by Pavel Leksha, who's connected to Skolkovo in Russia, but has well-placed a panel of advisors around the globe. Tom Vander Ark, who is formerly with the Gates Foundation and a key figure in virtual learning and ed tech and venture capital, was the US contact. And I think they've actually recently taken the website down, which is very interesting to me. But if you looking at their agenda, like Pavel Leksha, who's also connected to world skills building, was very much about also transhumanism. So this idea of, as we approach, climate change, end times, that we would merge with the cloud, that we would merge with machines, that we would upload our consciousness to the internet and be immortal, which sounds really wacky. And unless you actually look and see the people who are in that sphere, and there are a lot of very sophisticated thinkers who are thinking that this is something that we need to do. And even a few weeks ago, Whitney Webb had an article that they were looking at a FOIA request about the AI task force of the US that was very concerned about keeping up with China with data, and they're building AI, and this idea whoever gets to general artificial intelligence first can essentially rule the world or rule the technological systems of the world. And that there are people out there who think that we need to merge with computers or we will be eliminated. And so that's a whole nother layer, right? It's not just about making money and controlling people, it's actually they would prefer to have us become data so that we can be batteries to fuel this future that really doesn't have a place for humanity as we know it in it. And I'm just not willing to go there yet, because I think, well, I mean, I don't, it's all in motion, right? And so this is something in my journey too, under this lockdown situation, connecting with people in different parts of the world who come from backgrounds of like faith and spiritual practice of all kinds, who are tapping into like energy systems. You know, and I know this may sound sort of, but I think the belief that we know all the things is pretty misguided. Like with string theory and particle physics, and there are many things that we may not know, and there are many things that may go on faith and spirit and energy, of which I feel like the people who are part of this transhumanist domination zone would like to put us in their box and capture that all up and put us in their digital box. But then there's a counter group of people who may not fully be aware that they're working in a counterpoint to that, this yin yang, who are the goodness of the world and energy in a free and liberated fashion. And I know this may sound like kind of new agey, but like if you look back to cybernetics, like that has been their goal since the post-World War II era, the mid-1940s, is to create the cybernetic world. And that's a very, in my mind, Western, white, male, dominating version of the world, that you can control it and you can have power and dominion over it. But then there's a whole big other part of the world that isn't that. And that's why, for me, I think coming at this from a anti-colonial mindset, like an eco-social, eco-feminist mindset, is the counterpoint to the tech bro mindset, maybe.
When I have friends that are, that kind of embrace a lot of these transhumanist ideas, and hey, what's the problem? We get to live, we can live healthier and longer. I mean, healthier is questionable, but the idea that, you get, there's a lot of these diseases that we can get rid of, and we can, extend our lives, and it's like a tool, you use a shovel and you can dig a hole. You can, it's like seeing this as just tools to help liberate us, more, as opposed to seeing it as a tool that'll actually enslave us, which is I'm kind of more, I mean, even the internet, when the internet came out, it's like, we're going to be able to share information, and this is going to take the whole power structure down. And anymore, I can see it as just, it's a way to manipulate people on a level that's never been existed before. Even though, it's like a needle in a haystack. There is a lot of information on there that was previously inaccessible to people. But I'm interested in that, that a lot of people that are supportive of this are actually coming from an idealistic mindset of, hey, let's make the world a better place, and if technology can help us do that, why not?
You have to have a structural analysis. The people who are running these systems are not benevolent actors. The money that they give away is to certain ends to accomplish, to reinforce their own power and influence. It's not generative and redistributive. And it's dominating. I mean, to think that the people who run the cloud are not dominating us, that are just there somehow are benevolent overlords. I mean, I think it's incredibly misguided to think that. I don't think anyone can look and see the military contracts and the prison contracts and all the things that Amazon Web Services and Google, these smart cities, we see what's happened in Toronto with them pushing back against Sidewalk Labs and saying, we don't want smart cities. Like, we get where you're going with this and we don't trust you. The thing that I think is really critically important to understand in this moment, too, because while we're under this lockdown situation, clearly the 5G infrastructure is rolling out. The satellites, the OneWeb, the satellite Starlink, all of those are going up. There's this convergence of technology both in the atmosphere and on the ground in terms of creating almost, these fencing and control systems for people. People are getting these digital identities. There probably seems like we're going to end up, the digital health passports are going to be the open door to give everybody, get your QR code and know what your status is so we can track you everywhere you go. These systems are coming online now. And if you look towards like satellite linked livestock management. That I believe is the model, is that you would have these satellites and you have cows with the tag in their ear, or, goats or whatever collars, that you can manage free range, right, through geofencing. Like, it's like your electric dog fence, but you don't actually have the wire in it. You just, like, when you get up close to the edge, you can bump up and you get a vibration. If you keep going, you get shocked. We're almost to the point at which we can manage that with people. And if you imagine your UBI is on your phone, when you're like situated in different digital containment zones, like, they can control you at that level. They can control your access to basic needs of life, your shelter, your food, your water, your healthcare, all of those things can be predicated, if they're digital, linked into geofencing. And so Paul Romer he's out of NYU, and he has been theorizing for some time, collaborating with the World Bank, about things called charter cities, that you would have these carve-outs within cities that were sort of like no rules apply, and you can just make up your own rules for the free market. And that we would like manage refugee populations in that way. And so all of these pieces are running together. I think if we understand that Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates are not really benevolent entities, they are there to aggregate more power unto themselves, the tools that they're creating are not empowering us and disempowering them. They're essentially adding more and more layers of digital control onto us. These Silicon Valley people who would push all of this onto the masses and ed tech and have all of it's about interoperable data, because that's what they need for the predictive analytics. And there's a company called Clever that has QR code badges for kindergartners to log into their online ed tech education to maximize the data collection, because the little kids couldn't remember their passwords because they're just 5 years old. And so you could decorate your QR code with fun stickers, but that's the data extraction purpose. And that's running through charter schools in the Bay Area and Rocket Ship Academy charter schools. The people who are in Silicon Valley who are running these systems don't send their kids to schools that do that to them. Their kids get blocks and books.
Okay, so we're back here, and I'm hoping that we have all the technical issues worked out this time. Allison, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, and
Can
I
you
can
hear me?
you. Wow, this is amazing. By the way, my issue at the beginning, it was the dumbest thing. Like I said, I've been sick for a month, and I'm just kind of out of my element here. I had it streaming on another browser over on a second monitor, and I was getting the audio feedback in my ear, so I was getting this echoey thing. I don't even know if the audience was actually hearing what I was hearing, but it was throwing me off like big time. Dumb rookie move. But anyways, so thank you guys for all joining us. I've been trying to follow the streams, and I didn't get a chance to make this announcement at the beginning, so I'll just make this right now. We are trying to focus on the content and the work that the research that Allison has been doing, and I know that there's a lot of other narratives out there, and there's actually some people that I think are, well, I don't know, I don't know what's going on with them, but there are people that come onto these things who just want to talk shit. So I am curating. I've decided, I'm not really going to waste my energy and time. We don't have time for, at least I don't have time for that shit. Like I'm just, if you want to do that, you can do that somewhere else. But if you're here to criticize the content, like that's one thing. I have no issue with saying I disagree with Allison on this and here's why, and then we can actually have a discussion about it. But if you're just here to talk shit, I'm deleting you and blocking you, and we're going to create a curated space where we can actually discuss the work that Allison's been doing. And again, you don't have to agree with the actual if you have a disagreement, that's fine. Let's have a discussion about it. But I think that there are certain people that who even knows who they are. Online, you never know who you're even dealing with, that are just trying to distract and direct attention elsewhere.
We're focused.
Yeah, we're gonna focus here. We're gonna actually focus on
Focus, people. Focus.
all this incredible
More signal,
research.
less noise.
Yeah, so first of all, I'll just ask you, I've been collecting your questions and I'll keep collecting them. So if you have questions, put them either on the YouTube or the excuse me, or the Facebook. But I'll start out with a
Poor
question.
Jason.
I'm almost good. It wasn't COVID. I'm 99% sure, but who knows what the hell's going on. But I will say this. So listening to this, this is just the first one, Allison, but like where you're at now compared to where you're at then, like, have you changed any of your thoughts or views?
Well, it's interesting. I was I don't like watching myself really. I don't like watch a lot of content, including other people's or my own. So I did listen along just to refresh what I actually had said. And I feel like it holds up pretty well. I mean, we're 18 months later. Clearly there are whole other avenues that I've done a lot more of a deep dive into around that I was just in. This is May 2020, right? So just scratching the surface on the data collection, the impact data collection towards the singularity. And at that time, the whole idea of the digital twinning simulations, I was not as familiar with. And then the whole area of nanotech really wasn't anything that was on my radar, and is something that I've been gradually working on in collaboration with my friend Steffers at A Piece of Mindful. So, yeah, I mean, I think the one thing in retrospect, looking back, and some of this is a growth process, is that we spent a good amount of time in that first segment sort of talking about some of the prominent personalities, sort of the philanthrocapitalists, the impact investors. And a lot of my initial blog posts at the time were very much focused on Fourth Industrial Revolution, World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, Gates, and these players. And I think as we've moved forward for the past year and a half, my sense is that those guys are really set up to be the distractors and the lightning rods and the sacrificial lambs to sort of keep all of our attention on this certain overly dramatic cast of characters. Not to say that they're not problematic individuals or that they're not doing some nefarious things, but I've been working for the past 3 weeks on like an impact investing map of greater Dallas and Texas, and it's giant, and so those are all of the particulars, the bits and pieces, the moving parts that are happening on the ground in communities, that if you spend all your time talking about Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, you're not talking about the United Way, the Chambers of Commerce, Texas Instruments. Those things just conveniently get left off the radar. So not that you can do everything, in a 1 hour or even a 5 hour podcast, but I think looking back, that would probably be my main pivot on that, is that I think it's less about these over the top, larger than life personalities and more about understanding, as I mentioned towards the end, the structural nature of domination, like in how the structural nature of domination is morphing into the, Internet of Bio-Nano Things computing.
Okay. Sorry about that.
I would say there's a lot of stuff that I said even 18 months ago, and I think you and I have spoken about this before, that I thought, why are people not putting it together? And I think like people now are getting that the health passports aren't just about health, and that they're about larger geofencing issues, and they're getting some of the pieces, but by and large, I see very few people actually surfacing the weaponization of the social safety net, privatization. They'll talk about public-private partnerships, but very few people, other than like Raul Diego at Silicon Icarus, have been surfacing the impact investing frames. People are immediately jump to geofencing as something that is going to be targeting everyone equally, and the social credit scoring system, which I would say we need to understand this through the lens of the inadequacies of going back to Great Society and LBJ. When we were in Austin and looking at the ways in which the social safety net has always been problematic for people that get wrapped up in it, and then why that is, why a predatory social safety net exists. and that we have to understand all of those things. This thing didn't just flip on the switch and come out of nowhere. It was built on a very specific legacy of domination that does disproportionately affect poor people, people of color, refugees, and that if we're going to start talking about immediately a social credit scoring system, if we're doing that as a gut reaction, just as a response to like, I don't want anybody to control me, that's a that's a very reasonable response. But like, once you have that response, I think people need to start backing up and looking at the structure of it, because it is going to hit different groups of people in different ways. And I think we've had some challenges with people who think maybe I don't have a class analysis, but my frame has always been, because of my situation in Philadelphia, is that this is something that is disproportionately going to affect disenfranchised people and poor people first, and then expand out.
Right. And it's also interesting too, just I've been trying to think a lot about like why, there's people like there's a lot of people that I'm like, I'm mostly on the same page with you, but there's something there where we're having, there's like a little bit different like understanding of what's actually happening. And I do think it's like there's a foundational worldview or whatever that people have, and a lot of people are still kind of believe in like market-based solutions, whereas like I kind of like have just dropped, like I don't even believe in property as it exists, like and that doesn't mean like state property either. Like I don't think, like, the idea that you can own land is completely insane to me, and now how we manage it is a question. Like, how do we if there's going to be conflicts of like, but like, I think if I'm a human being, I have a right to have a home. So my right is derived from being a human being, whereas the narrative that we live in is you have a right to buy a home with money, which is a fiction. You know what I mean? So it's like, so a lot of people are still trying to hang on.
But you might have a right to have a home in a smart suit with a and smart floors and smart toilet.
Yeah. And when
that's challenging, like progressive end is people would be like, yeah, like let's set it all up with these like little living pods with smart devices, and then you can like pay with behavior points to like have your right to have a house. So it's weird. Like I was hoping at this point writing there that
you're breaking up. If you have any other things running that are taking up the internet, like maybe close them down. Do you have any streams or any other tabs open?
I have to go down.
Yeah, just because you're chopping up a little bit there.
I don't know. I could try to go down to my living room.
Anyway, So, but
anyway, I was just saying that, like, I was. Yeah.
Go ahead.
You were saying the market-based solutions, I guess.
Just really what I was getting at is people's different like worldviews of like, there's a foundational worldview where it's like, I don't really like, I'm okay with markets. I don't think that like all of our activities should be centered around markets. And just to clarify my thing about like, I have a right to own a home. That doesn't mean like the government needs to give me a home or anything. I'm just saying like there are homeless people that there's a piece of land and they just set up a tent and they're not even allowed to do that. These people come in and say, this is, you're not allowed to be here. And so it's like, it's a little bit different. It's actually outside of a lot of my worldview is outside of anything that I've come across. I have a very unique worldview, but people want to put it into a category. But my point is, like, people come at this from different points of view. A lot of people, someone that's coming at this from like a traditional left or a socialist or whatever, versus someone that's coming at this from a libertarian, versus someone that's coming from just a more traditional conservative. There are foundations there that I think need to be worked through, and actually like more discussions need to happen amongst people that have different worldviews, parsing out like what they agree on and what they disagree on. Because I think we all agree. I think a lot of people agree more than they disagree, but there's been a deliberate division there that's been manufactured. But
I have a very eclectic Twitter following.
Yeah,
the way in which people self-identify as any actual accurate representation, like people are trying to figure out stuff outside the boxes, I think. And I think for the most part, because I tend to stick at like, I mean, sometimes with some sharp commentary, but mostly factual stuff and throwing things out. Like, I think that brings people along in ways like, I'm like, here's some stuff. What do you think of this stuff? This is what I think of it. And usually, generally, it's not partisan it all. And
Right.
the challenging thing is blockchain.
Yeah,
That's my
that is a challenging one. And
yeah.
and Allison and I have kind of a different take on the blockchain community, whereas like Allison's like, I don't even want to have discussion. Blockchain's a part of the problem, and if you don't understand it, figure it out, and whatever. I agree that blockchain.
I said you couldn't have laser eyeballs on my page. Like, that's a pretty clear statement. If you're devoted enough to put your profile pic with laser eyeballs, then that's my stand.
Yeah.
You've already decided to advertise for that worldview.
Yeah.
I'm probably not going to change your mind.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're not going to change most people's mind, especially in that space,
Yeah.
because there's money to be made. That's a hard obstacle to overcome. But or there's possible money to be made. And the question about how many people are actually going to make money off it is. But clearly a lot of people have made money off it. But my approach to that is a little bit different, whereas I'm actually willing to engage because I believe there's a lot of people in that space who actually have good intentions, who are just don't understand how they're actually coming through the side door, but they're going to end up in the same place. People think they're doing this alternative thing, but it's going to be captured and it's going to be sucked up, and it may have been designed that way from the very get-go. And if you look at a lot of the banks and corporations that are heavily involved in blockchain and these cryptos, you have your people who are doing the programming, and I've done events, around, hackathons and whatnot, and they're just young people that are idealistic and they want to change the world and they want to use this for something positive. They just don't understand that that's not going to happen. The venture capitalists and the hedge fund people are going to basically exploit you for your work. But that's a whole other conversation. Let's actually get to some questions.
Okay.
I've got some questions here, and I'm going to have to catch up here because there's been a lot of discussion on the thread. So the first question is from Matt. What does Allison think about the narrative surrounding global warming or environmentalism being hijacked? How do we best protect ecosystems once public trust in these institutions is gone?
Well, one of my very first, no, it wasn't the thing that led you to come out to see me, but like right before the pandemic was declared, like the week before, I ended up doing a whole presentation specifically around the Sustainable Development Goals and poverty management and sort of the impact investing space. And so my personal position is that essentially, like, we are living in a weaponized environment. And I'm in the middle. I've just started Alana Freeland's new giant book, 600-page book on geoengineering the environment and towards transhumanism. And I would say we have huge problems with the environment, well beyond the carbon narrative that is out there. And the carbon narrative, I think, and especially the carbon trading and these incipient technocracies that is coming along next to them are huge issues, because I think essentially through the One Health, the World Bank's One Health program, they will use environmental harm and public health to essentially alienate us from natural systems, particularly indigenous people who are still sitting on natural resource commodities, and for safety and ostensible environmental benefit, isolate people into these megacity regions, and then keep nature away from regular people to be managed in who knows what ways. And those would either be separating people out so that the elite have access to wilderness spaces, or to make it so that people can't tell when terrible mining, clear-cut forestry, all of that is taking place, because people have been moved off of the land. So I'm of two minds. One, like, I know that there is tremendous harm that is being done to the earth. On the other hand, I know that all of the solutions that are being proposed are linked to channeling global capital through natural life, genetic life, towards the creation of a digital replica. And that is all happening on blockchain, and it is all connected with changes in frequency, and essentially the goal of aggregating data analytics about genomics of every living being down to the microbes on the earth, to be engineered as sort of cybernetic systems engineering, towards, I think, some forced evolution into this like a non-water carbon-based life form. So how do we navigate that, right? And I think that's precisely the problem we're dealing with, this weaponized narrative. And we knew that going in with the whole Greta rollout, and that's something that Cory Morningstar has gone into in great detail in The Wrong Kind of Green, is looking at the corporate hijacking of the climate issue. Now, I would say in terms of climate change, I don't feel like that conversation can really be had until we have a much more robust understanding of the decades long of geoengineering that has happened, and the changes to the atmosphere that have come in place through environmental aerosolization and frequency weaponization, all those things that are happening. I mean, I think our atmosphere is a weaponized place, and that is something the general public is not familiar with. And so it's very hard to talk about global warming such as it is without having a clear understanding of how the atmosphere has been militarized and who is actually controlling it now. So I guess long story short is, I do think that we are in a lot of harm. I think a lot of it has to do with things that were intentionally engineered, not just by random people pursuing problematic behaviors. While I do think that global consumer consumption is a huge issue, global supply chains are an issue. Many things in Agenda 21, like as somebody who lives in a city, I like to live in a city. I like to ride bikes. I like to have like accessible farmers markets. All of the things they talk about in Agenda 21, if they weren't enforced and tied to biotechnology, I would probably be up for a lot of them if they didn't involve sensor networks and putting it all and tracking me on the blockchain and creating a digital twin. So I'm not against a lot of the ostensible green things, but I know really a lot of it is it's cover for creating a faux counterfeit synthetic world that is militarized, and it's going to continue to advance the interests of the wealthy elite. Now, how do you have that conversation with an NPR listener, which I was once until fairly recently? I don't know. I don't know how you have this conversation. Once you know, I tried to be like, okay, like, Arizona has 2,500 synthetic biology companies. Where do we think this goes based on market logic? So yeah, how do we have this conversation? And for me, that's why my frame has always been trying to center what is unfolding within the frames of the doctrine of domination that Stephen Newcomb has speaks so eloquently, the papal bulls, and the centering of indigenous sovereignty and indigenous culture, not just of Turtle Island, but people who are indigenous to their lands of Europe, of Asia, of Africa. People have their indigenous cultural connections and reciprocal relationships to soil and trees and crops and animals, and that all of that has really been incredibly disrupted over the past 400 or 500 years. And so I don't know how we roll it back. It's not any kind of easy answer. I can't say that I have an easy answer, but that's why I try to center my conversation in that space.
Yeah, I actually, and I think that is a really important point, which is that like a lot of people that are like more conservative or more libertarian kind of they dismiss a lot of the environmental, they're just like, they're kind of just focused on their personal freedom. And I think that even if they're not personally concerned about that, they do themselves a disservice by not addressing that, because there are real problems that even the World Economic Forum is talking about, problems that are actual real. There are problems with this. There are problems with the way that this arrangement is set up. But like you said, they're actually not. They don't care about the environment. They don't care about.
They don't.
They don't care about the poor. But like you said, like we do need to.
They'll finance your warehouse for your microgreens and your aerosolized synbio, and vaccine lettuce.
And I think we could bring people together of saying, hey, yes, we, acknowledging like we have these problems that we need to solve, and we need to figure this out. Like, I don't know what the solutions are, but yeah, it's just recognizing that these people are not good players, and they're liars, and they have other agendas. Because that's my frustration with the people on the left, is they're like, yeah, we're having all these problems, and then they just follow these people. I'm just like, yo, Greta is a fraud. Sorry, it's a fact. Yeah. And like you said, Cory did a great job of I actually have it in book form, the Cory's article about Greta, which is phenomenal. Like she
And I
totally.
would say too, even like on the lens of indigenous like worldview, that's no group is homogenous, right? There's no one homogenous group, and those cultures have been very much traumatized, for centuries as part of this program. So, and the challenge is, at least in the United States and Canada, when you have such harm being wrought in your communities, they would look outward to recognition of their rights. And so when they would look outward, they look to the United Nations, right? And so in many respects, many of the indigenous groups, because they could not get redress from the governments in which they had become embedded, who were not honoring treaties, they looked outside themselves, and that is the place. So that there are these really complicated dynamics, like the UN has itself, and economically speaking, it's messy. It's all very messy, as I guess what I'm saying. Like even within those communities, there are people who are aligned with resource extraction, blockchain, other things. There's no one monolith. No one group is a monolith. So like for me, it's centering, how do we stay in right relationship with the earth and natural systems? Like how can we be a good relative, not in a way that is a cultural appropriating, but how do we get back to that? And that's a big ask.
Okay, so we have lots of questions,
Okay.
and I can't really Ilau. I don't really know this name, but would it change something if people deaf in power like Billy G and Dr. Fraudchi
Oh.
would let us resign, or would the Hydra system just grow another head? That's kind of a convoluted question, but
Yeah.
so
I mean, I
let me.
think that sort of speaks to my initial statement that I think early on I was looking at the key big figures, and what I've realized is that, and I've kind of said, like, when you have a Klaus Schwab out in Switzerland, you have something to point to say, there's the problem, it's out there. And what I would say is, for the most part, at least, coming from the United States, a lot of this is homegrown. Like the war machine is homegrown, the finance structure is homegrown, the internet of bio-nano things is homegrown. It's actually happening in our universities, in our chambers of commerce, in our backyards. And so people need to actually dig down, understand the system that I'm talking about, which is happening through technology-based sensor networks, and then also these predatory impact investing programs, and then start digging it out, because it's in every single community, and try to educate people. And the challenge is that there's very many very well-educated people of the managerial class who are running all of these programs, who are running the nonprofits, who are holding the fundraisers, who are doing all of the pieces. And so, yeah, it's a hydra. I mean, I kind of had this bit of a frustration a week or so ago. Someone shared like this David Martin saying this quote, like, I'm going to have a slide, and it's going to have all the names of the people on one slide of this, fraud, this giant fraud. And I'm like, you can't fit them on one slide. And if you do, you're reducing the problem, and then you've totally missed the point that it's structural. And so that's where I'm at. People need to move beyond Gates and Fauci and Schwab. Not to say that they don't have anything to do with it. They do, but they're playing their role. This is all a big drama unfolding, and they're there to give cover to everybody else, in my opinion. I can't hear you.
I had muted myself because I was coughing and I didn't want to interrupt you. So I actually think that they shouldn't be ignored necessarily, like, but they should be put into context, like that they're part of a bigger thing. I mean, it's weird, like the Klaus Schwab is almost like a cartoon character. It's almost like they created this thing. They're like, oh, let's have him wear this really dark, weird outfit, and make sure he's got a German accent. And like, it's almost like if they were writing a movie or something. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, this is the bad guy. This is where they're gonna play. But yeah. But I don't think you should necessarily ignore that, but just, make sure. The question is how much time you're putting into that versus like a lot of the other stuff that you I was trying to bring up your map earlier. Maybe if you want to email me that, the Texas map. I was going to throw that on the screen just to show people
Oh,
just the extent of it. I couldn't find that. I couldn't log into Twitter because my password I had reset.
okay.
But anyway, so let's take more questions. John says, "Do you feel that they've overplayed their hand?"
Uh, um, I mean, I think the challenge is that most people still don't see how the machine fits together. I think they still think it's a public health event. And they're starting to get how the public health event fits in with the other stuff. But I'm still not seeing, like, and I think that's the thing with, the David Martin slide. These are the people that did the thing. It's like, well, what thing are we talking about? Are we talking about some narrow, health thing, patents, or are we actually talking about the fundamental structure, which is this next wave of globalization and the next wave of artificial intelligence and new forms of alternative energy that may enmesh with our own biological systems and like engineered tissue and all of the other stuff. Like we don't actually even really know what it is that we're wrapped up in right now, because it's a war of narrative. And so for the most part, the narrative has been pretty narrowly focused on the health aspect, and then gradually it's expanded because of, clearly, like I was dead on about the health passports, that's now forced it into something broader. But people aren't making the connection to education. They're not making the connection to digital driver's licenses. They're not making the connection to e-government systems. They're not making the connection to government outcomes-based government contracting. So when you say, have they overplayed their hand, I would say people still don't actually get what's going on. So I don't think so, because they could pull back and they could all say, okay, we're not gonna do any health passports, right? We're gonna give that up for a couple years. We'll put that on the back burner. Now we're gonna give everybody a digital driver's license and digital education vouchers, and we're gonna put all of the health medical records on blockchain. Like, then it still goes forward. It's still going forward if you understand the nature of the entire machine. So yeah, so I don't know. I mean, clearly, like where I am in Philadelphia, nobody's pushing back against this. I know internationally a lot more people. I think it does help that some of the things I projected would happen have happened, so that even my spouse, who doesn't quite get me or understand, he's like, oh yeah, you're right, that actually did happen, right? Like they're actually doing health passports. I got him to admit the other day, like, oh yeah, I have heard that there are people in Europe fighting this. Okay, so it's helpful. Would I say overplayed? I don't think so. I mean, I'm not hopeless, but I don't think people actually understand the game.
Gotcha.
Jason, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I was distracted trying to catch up on other things, so I didn't listen to everything
sorry.
you said.
No, that's okay.
No, it's all right. I'm trying to do two things here. So I don't have comments on what I didn't hear. So
no, that's okay. I just didn't know if you wanted to add anything about if they've overplayed.
Oh, I think it's too difficult. I think it's too
actually
difficult to say, but because we don't really know how. It seems to me, from my purview, that things are going as planned, and there's some resistance really to that some narrow resistance, not resistance to this the fact that there's a new system that's being put into place. From the banking system to, I mean, like everything, like the police,
the central bank is
like
the currency,
the central bank, exactly. I mean, but literally every aspect is being changed. This is not just about if like you talked about this a lot too, which is having these narrow conversations around, oh, we just need to stop this, but recognizing how that there's a large thing going on. Most of it seems to be going along. Like it doesn't seem to be right now. It doesn't look good. I mean, it's actually progressed a lot further than I would have ever imagined. But who knows? We just keep pushing back. I will say on Facebook, I'm not seeing any questions pop up, and it may just be that Facebook is not showing. Facebook is weird. Like all these stupid social media things are just BS. But but for some reason I'm not seeing any questions. So if you are, message me or something if you're trying to get a question in on Facebook, because I'm not seeing. I saw some from earlier, but I don't know. There's only 14 viewers, and that's interesting too. This is a side note, but like right now, the Facebook live stream has 14 views. The first live stream I did with Allison had thousands. So clearly, we're being
Meta doesn't like me.
we are being throttled like serious. According to YouTube, there's 48 people watching, and again, before I could, I could get 48 viewers like doing nothing. So, I think we need to be more proactive, and I've said this before, in getting this out and like, sharing the links and talking to people. Like it. I supposedly, if you like it, it makes it go up. But who knows? Their algorithms. I mean, I guess if you're blacklisted, you're blacklisted. Anyway, so another question, David. Gates has infiltrated Russia big time too. How much cahoots with the Chinese? I don't know if that was like that may have been a part of a conversation, because there's conversations and then there's questions. So if you do have a question, put the word question or put a big Q or something, so I know it's a question for Allison. I think that was part, because there was a conversation happening about Gates. I think that was part of that. I'm going to skip that unless you have something to say about that.
No, I mean, I would just say essentially this transformation of the metaverse is global. It's about a cloud-based world. And so it's touching every single quarter, and it's not really about nationalism at this point. The borders only exist for people, not for global capital, and not for the idea of the metaverse. So anybody who's still stuck in that framing of like somehow this is China's done this, or it's not that. It's at this point at the academic level, if you spend any time digging into the researchers, like the people who are developing the nanotechnology and the synthetic biology and the technology, like it's totally international. Like the grad students at Harvard, and I'm sure over there, like it's a mix of folks. It's very highly international. The information flows are international. They're not. It's not a nationalist program, in my opinion.
Okay. What is the connection between gamification and social score ranking? Are they the same? The interaction between them, reward punishment system, which is higher, lower? So did that question make sense? The way it was written is kind of weird, but what's the connection between gamification?
I mean, I think people like to use the idea of social credit scoring to make it sound as though the Chinese are doing that. Like generally when people talk about a social credit score, they say, see, we're going to turn into China. That's how that narrative goes. We're getting social credit scores just like China. And it's a diversion tactic. And it's a diversion tactic because we actually, FICO developed the credit scoring systems in the 1950s. That's a U.S. Silicon Valley program that came straight out of Stanford. Those were Stanford alumni that developed the FICO scoring. Now, if you actually look at the FICO company, the credit bureau system, it's much more about business decision management and other types of decision management. And so once you understand that the future is like built on behavioral currency, have you demonstrated compliance? Do you have a token that shows you are compliant, that unlocks this privilege, that unlocks this level of mobility, this opportunity for you? That's the decision and the risk profiling that's going to be happening. And that's going to be tied with blockchain identity. So I would say, I would suggest people drop the social credit scoring concept because it's fraught and it has a lot of baggage about anti-China. I think gamification is important. I think understanding game theory and how game theory inform both military strategy and financial strategies are important. Once we have everybody on blockchain and connected in with the sensor network systems, both the nano biosensors and the smart city sensors and the smart build back better infrastructure sensors, we have these digital twins. All of that social behavior will be fed into the model. And then people's behaviors will become incentivized through a gamification process. Really, how I describe this, what's coming as augmented or mixed reality, is like the CIA's video game world. Welcome to the CIA's video game is what we're living in. Now, to understand why would they need gamification, a lot of it is built into these social impact markets, where what they want is demonstrated behavior change, and they will deem behavior change to be something that is in alignment with the sustainable development goals. So green, sustainable behaviors, and that will all be tracked on the blockchain through how you purchase, how you log in with your QR codes, how you interface with devices, how the AI determines your mental health status, how your biosensors determine your internal organ status. All of these things will be tracked and gamified, right? And if you're not behaving, then they will incentivize your choices to make the choice that is their preferred choice. And by doing that, there are actually going to be packages of debt products weighted on, do you behave? Will you behave in the right way? So I would say most all of that creative finance packaging, that securitization of compliant, sustainable behavior, like that's all of us. That's coming out of the United States, among other places. And the blockchain piece is all weighted in Switzerland, in Zug, which is the crypto valley. So it's global, but the financial apparatus around the credit scoring and the measurable behavior change and the gamification is very much linked to the financial markets. And in many respects, I think that is where the central bank digital currency comes into play as well, is that they can program money, and then they can have it, and then essentially what I believe part of the going direct model that allows the central banks to get money directly to people, I think in some way that there will be a pass through where people can become investable commodities, and that you will become an investable commodity on blockchain with blockchain currency for global portfolios eventually. Now exactly how they get all of the pieces together to make that happen, but I think essentially in the future you will have your behavior tracked against various portfolio products, some of which BlackRock, pension funds, Alibaba, you name it. You'll end up being an asset, a data asset.
The social credit thing, social score, I admit I've actually used that in discussions. And the reason why I did was because it was something that people actually understood. Like people know about the social credit score. So it was like, it was like a framework where I could like start from to get people to wrap their mind around just the general idea. But it's not entirely accurate. Obviously what's going on here is different than what's happening there. And it's an interesting, maybe that's another discussion, but it's an interesting thing of how sometimes, or not sometimes, oftentimes, we will market the ideas based on what we think might connect with people, because it's frustrating. You're trying to reach people and you're not reaching people, so you're like, okay, well, how can I come at this where I can get them to understand? But a lot of times you do that at the expense of being accurate about what's going on.
Well, and I've done that myself. I did that like when I was doing my first talks 5 years ago. I would say that. So I'm saying it from a place of learning, but really, if you take the social part off and you just say credit score, like most people before we connected to China, we'd be like, oh, you got divorced. Oh, you had student loan debt. Oh, you defaulted on your car payment. Oh, your credit score is low, right? We didn't have the social part. So I don't know. For me, we have to just be mindful about how the narrative is framed. Because I think a lot of times they would like for us to imagine that the problem is out there somewhere, as opposed to that we're actually in the belly of the beast in the United States.
Okay, next question. If humanity fails to rise up and stop the nightmare, murderous, fourth reset, racist, fascist agenda, so if we fail to rise up, how will that immense defeat affect the health and well-being of the future generations? So, like, what are the consequences if we don't actually stop this right now? I think is what the question is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my framing has been probably for the last 6 months or so that this is about maintaining natural life on this planet. And that's one thing in the narrative framing is like rise up and stop this thing. Like, and so for me, like, I don't imagine this happening in a militant kind of way, because it's fluid. It's like you're just swimming in this ocean of and people don't even really understand all of the different manifestations of what we're navigating. I think that the biggest thing is losing the idea of natural life, because it's not just about people. And a lot of the freedom resistance movement is about human liberty. And I would say what's coming with synthetic biology has actually also been piloted with like simple organisms, right? Yeast. We're going to program this yeast. We're going to put it on a computer. We're going to engineer the gene sequencing. We're going to make it into something, a product that we want. We're going to make it into a product, a bacteria. They do that all this time. We're going to engineer it, and we're going to make it do the thing. And yeah, it's like I had a tagline, like I stand with the yeast, but like we have to actually understand this domination standpoint of like, it's not just about people, it's about the entire world. It's about trees. It's about the microbiome. It's about water. It's about every single thing on the planet becoming enmeshed in these engineered synthetic biological systems. And it's overwhelming, but that's, to me, that is the unifying factor. Like, no matter where you are in the political spectrum, I think we can all agree that maintaining life as we know it on this planet is important, because if we don't refuse a synthetic biology future, all the unborn children, like, they won't have a say. All of the, not yet born bees or lightning bugs or what, like, they won't have a say. So those of us who can see what's unfolding, who've tracked the scientists, like yesterday, I spent all afternoon going through all of the Department of Energy installations, right? Because I'm like, there's something going on with the Department of Energy. Like, those of us who can actually see the machine and the parts of the machine have to interrogate it, not for people, but for all of the beings. And so that's my frame, is that we need to take a position as keepers of natural life to maintain the planet in that way, in a way that does not become engineered by nanotechnologists, as that we do not all become like products in some sort of atomically precise manufacturing program, which is sort of what they imagine they're doing at Zyvex Labs. Like, we're just molecules to be lined up by some waveform and then turn into some other thing. It's crazy. Like I keep saying, if you try to actually explain to people what's happening, like this Japanese moonshot project, they would tell you you're bonkers. They'd just be like, you're bonkers. And I'm like, no, it sounds worse than anything you'd see on the TV, but it's really happening here. Let me show you the report. Now, can they do it? I don't know. And I'm never, like, me, Jason, I'm never like a fatalist about these things. I try not to be over the top, like, we're all going to die. But I'm like, people. Like, our Department of Energy is hanging out in Japan with the EU, and they're planning a future of cyborg avatar capitalism. That's a problem in my book, because nobody knows. Like, it's all happening without any informed consent.
Well, I think the yeast rights movement is going to have a hard time getting off the ground, but
I don't know. I think it's important.
I do too think it's important, but I know I get what you're saying. It's a different framing of like looking at life as having some inherent value, versus just looking at everything as how does it fit into this thing? Like, how can it be used? How can people be used? How can the plant life be used? And obviously, like, it's a balance, because we use. We have a relationship with life, but there's something really perverse about the mentality of, well, I'd say our whole culture, really. Like, we need to break out of a lot of our belief systems. So why do you think populations that have been so disadvantaged do not see the detriment of the hatch plate tables and other monitoring like that?
I guess I'm confused. I know that, the hash play tables are out there. They haven't been brought to scale yet. And, I would say it wasn't, I don't know if I said it in the first, I can't remember if I said it in the first interview, but, like, those were put into North Tulsa in the year of the 100th anniversary of the race massacre in North Tulsa, which is a predominantly Black community part of Tulsa, on of the 100th anniversary of the race massacre, and those play tables with surveillance installed in them to track children's social behaviors. The foundation that was behind that was the Kaiser Family Foundation, and the head of their foundation, actually, his name is Ken Levitt, and he was an advisor to George Tenet of the CIA. So none of this is good. Like, none of these things can be justified as legitimate. And so that hasn't come to scale yet. And I think what they need for these impact markets to scale, along with UBI and the programmable money, is they need the digital identity. They need the health passports. They need Common Pass. They need to link it to the central bank digital currency systems. And, they need a child before they're born in utero to be assigned a blockchain identity so that when they pop out, they can start tracking them on the blockchain against their social determinants of health and their workforce development pathways and their mental fitness and their brain building power and all of those things. And it's going to happen on blockchain. And that's why, I've had issues with the crypto people in the past, but like, I'm firmly convinced that that's the infrastructure of the metaverse. The military metaverse is blockchain, and they need that for the interoperable data. So until that comes into place, I don't think we're still going to see a lot of pilot projects, but it won't scale yet. But I ended up in a conversation at a coffee shop like across from City Hall a couple days ago. I was in downtown, and I haven't been out in public in quite a while, and I probably won't get taken out in public again. But there was a group of 20-year-olds, and it was like quite kind of a crowded coffee shop. It was Black Friday. And so I went to go grab a table, mostly so I didn't have to wear a mask and I could sit there mask free. If you stand in line, you have to wear a mask. If you can sit at the table, you don't. Ran and got a table. It was near this group of 20 somethings. And they were like, "Oh, did you hear about the newest variant?" And they were just all beside themselves about this stuff. And I was just like, oh, and I should just keep my mouth shut. But I said, you need to look up the internet of bio-nano things. No, seriously, look up the internet of bio-nano things. That's all I'm saying. Ian Akilda's at Georgia Tech, internet of bio-nano things. So I was trying to keep it I'm not going to lecture you on stuff, but let me tell you something you should actually know about. And then this guy comes and sits down right next to me, and we're all on top of each other. It's so tight. And he gets into the conversation, and I tell him all the stuff. And at one point I go, "Do you know about social impact bonds?" He goes, "I run banks." I run banks. And he's like, "What's the end game?" I'm like, "Well, it's to use this impact data to trigger the singularity. That's where it's going." And it's the funny thing is he could totally believe, he could follow me. I guess he was a finance guy, and I couldn't tell. One of them was his daughter, I think, but at least she called him dad. But the rest, I was like, is this his college kids? There's all these 20-something kids, and this guy's a little older than me. And I'm like, but that's the logic of the market. The logic of the market is the new empire is the metaverse. It's digital goods. That's what's coming, and your digital identity tracks you and your digital goods in the metaverse, and that's what the health passports are for. And I pulled out my Nephilim brochures and I put some on the table, and he did actually take them. But I don't know where I was going with all this, but I'm trying to have these conversations with people, and I don't know who this guy is that knows about social impact bonds and runs banks, but maybe I got him to think about something, because I was saying, at the end I said, we should not put children on blockchain. There's this group, I'm like, we should not be putting children on blockchain. And they all looked at me, and I'm like, he's like, "Well, what do you mean?" And I'm like, "Tanzania, the first unborn child put on blockchain in 2018. And he's like, "How do you know that?" I'm like, "It's on payments.com." And so, it's very weird. At the very end, he said something he's like, "Well, we should," sort of saying, well, kids want to be on games. I'm like, no, we're pushing kids into the metaverse. These online education programs are pushing them in. And he's like, well, the answer is in the heart space, which is kind of odd, for this 50-something-year-old guy to be in the middle of the coffee shop going, "The answer is in your heart." And I'm like, yeah, that's why I sit in coffee shops and do this, to try to explain to people that we shouldn't put children on blockchain. So who knows? I tried to figure out, I went through all the business school profiles to see if I could find them, and I couldn't. So I don't know. But
no, I think that last question,
it
seemed to me like the question was just but why, why aren't people, you would think people why aren't people against it, that are in these spots? Why would anybody put their kid on a, obviously there's financial
these are people
reasons
who are on a welfare to
vulnerable.
work program.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's why I'm saying we actually have to come to terms with what, at least in states, the Great Society was, the social safety net was, and we have to be willing to like unlearn some stuff, right? Like, so if you look back at like the women's liberation movement and you understand that that was about unlocking a whole nother element in the workforce, and it had a global financial element to it, like, sure, do I think that women should have an opportunity to have fulfilling jobs and like adult lives that are mixed, not like outside of their family and with their family? Sure. But what we've ended up with is now, in order to support a middle class household, you need 2 adults in the household and like maybe 2 or 3 jobs just to get by, to pay the child care. And so now essentially the child care is going to be like, oh, your child has to be on a surveillance play table to pay off their impact debt to access childcare so that the parent can go to work. And many of these jobs aren't jobs that anybody wants to do anymore. And then soon, eventually, the robots are going to do the job. So we'll never actually do the job. We'll just be learning the things. And as we learn the tasks, we'll be exporting our consciousness into the robots to trigger the singularity. Like, it's crazy, but that's how it is. So like for the people, no one wants to go put their child on the surveillance play table. But if what they say is, well, do you need housing? Do you need food assistance? Well, if you do, you have to sign up for our program. And our program involves welfare to work. And you have to either be training for work or working. And so we'll put your child in daycare. And by the way, the daycare is an impact opportunity and your child is on a surveillance play table. What are you going to do? And then if you say, no, thank you, and then you're housing insecure, and then they take the Child Protective Services takes your children. And like, we know terrible things happen to those children. Right. So it's impossible situations. And that's what I'm trying to say is like, there's many sort of middle class and managerial class and upper class, professional class people who have never been confronted with what it is to run up into the gears of this machine.
But
that,
they
like,
also,
on the
they have
end,
those things. They have those tables. Like, don't they have those tables? And it's not just
some of them
poor.
are in libraries.
It's not just poor and low income people that where they're doing that, right? I mean, they've expanded that to like middle class facilities, haven't they? I mean,
for the most part, the ones I know about are Educare. Although I've seen in Philadelphia, they have some in the libraries. But the libraries are very much in on this too. The public library system, sadly. This library systems are being used to pilot a lot of the virtual reality technologies and the early computing systems. Like I remember even when my child was really young in the children's library that they would have all these computers and the kids would all want to flock to the computers. Like they just have like 2 or 3 and you could never pull the kids away. And it was really disruptive. But the libraries have been set up to implement the technology system. So I have seen one in a Delaware County, or an article about one in a Delaware County library, but they're not scaled yet. But it's part of the larger universal pre-K conversation that's coming, and it's going to be coming once everybody has to join coding boot camps to earn their, access to their food assistance or their UBI, and then their kids are going to have to go there.
Right. Well, I do want to stop and take a quick break and just put a shout out to our sponsors. Nephilim is a really great company. I'm joking. We have another video about these Nephilim flyers we made. It's a fictional company.
Oh, so you got them.
I did get them. And actually, you can get, if you guys want copies of these to hand out, it's a good conversation starter about all of this. So let me take some more questions because I've got a bunch more.
Designed by our friend
Raul Diego. That's right. Of Silicon Icarus. Yep. Okay, how does carbon pricing, carbon credits tie into this topic? Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I do think that like within the technocracy space overall, like the idea of an energy economy is part of this, like is a central part of this. Like I would say, like I really respect Patrick Wood's historical research into the technocracy movement and Thorstein Veblen and the Howard Scott and the Columbia School of Industrial Engineering. Like it's very helpful. I would say I'm still kind of waiting for the technocracy folks to pull it forward into the impact investing space and to look at it as markets, because I have a sense that generally they tend to shy away from talking about the global capital element of this, the financial and the securitization element. I think will be activities that are tokenized, where values are assigned to pattern of consumption or to behaviors, that can then be tracked in the ledger and kept track of, and that the idea of the carbon trading that would happen between giant companies that have carbon outputs, by their industrial processes, for them trading carbon credits, it's going to be coming down to the micro scale on individual people, right? So how much does your personal consumption or your behavior track against some baseline that's determined what an average citizen is allowed to do in terms of carbon consumption or outputs, like carbonized behavior. And then once you hit that threshold in the ledger, then maybe you will have an opportunity to buy excess tokens off of somebody else who hasn't. I mean, I think it's that kind of market, but clearly those markets were never meant to actually address the problems. They were just meant to create new financial market systems. So, I know that there are some new credit card systems that are attached to those carbon tracking. Much of this is actually embedded in the larger environmental social governance movements of also tracking not only individuals, but companies and their packaging. There's a whole section of companies coming out as benefit corporations. So companies will be tracking their own supply chains. And this will be used to further the impact markets. And a lot of it is just about creating tons and tons of data. So ironically, it's like, well, I'll be tracking all of the carbon, and it will all be going as data into some giant data center that uses a lot of energy to hold the data and everybody's digital carbon twin out there. Yeah, I mean, it's a piece of it. I would say it's not the only part. I think some people sort of limit this is strictly about carbon trading. And I'm like, it's a key piece of the game, the structure and the parameter, but I would say it goes beyond that. That to stop there is a little bit too limiting. I will say that Cardano, which is the blockchain platform with the ADA coin that has its sights set on taking over the continent of Africa, their holding company is called Input Output Hong Kong. So if you understand that a lot of what is coming is actually about programming people's behaviors, programming their neurons, programming their thoughts, programming their biological processes with nanobots or frequencies, or containing them in smart cities and then shaping their behavior that way. Like this idea of energy inputs and energy outputs and all of it being tracked and being in circuits and cybernetic feedback loops. That's another thing to think about, because I think a lot of this does go back to the Norbert Wiener and the Macy conferences and the idea of programming people like animals and machines is sort of where they were at back in the 50s.
All right, thank you. Lisa asks, on the subject of SIPRA, SIPPRA, have you been able to parse out what the Great Reset, Fourth Industrial Revolution agendas are obviously obvious in the Biden administration? If you haven't, do you recommend someone who has? So related, SIPRA related to the agenda.
Yeah, so SIPRA is called the Social Impact Partnerships Pay for Results Act. And that was the seed money for these pay for success contracts, the government contracts. I haven't done a lot of writing on that. For most people, I know Catherine Austin Fitts has spoken some on these different opportunity zones. I think that those are central to the pay for success programs, because some of this is also going to be a land grab, especially around smart city redevelopment. How does it fit together? I think a lot of it is going to be tied in with the infrastructure bills and reskilling for this fourth industrial revolution. So be ways of channeling global capital into quote unquote opportunity zones. And that will be a way of assessing equity with innovation, disruptive innovation. And this is kind of part of what I'm mapping in Dallas, is that, they'll channel capital into distressed, communities that have been distressed on purpose, and then remake them as nodes to advance these new technologies, probably largely STEM-centric, data analytics, AI, coding, cybersecurity, synth bio, all of these kinds of jobs. and then they will be rebuilt from the ground up as sort of smart infrastructure tied to the infrastructure bills. And then the people who are doing the work, either both in the building of them or filling those spaces, those commercial spaces afterwards, will be reskilled into these fourth industrial revolution jobs. And then meanwhile, their children will be at the surveillance play tables getting their character triaged for the next round of building the metaverse. And I think that that's generally how it's going to go. And then all of these things will be, it's hard because you think back to like LEED certification, like LEED, like sustainability, but all of those are really metrics that are going to be gamed. So when they build in these new opportunity zones, the new buildings, are building all of this new infrastructure actually making the world more sustainable or not? Because I would say for the most actually do have a better handle on non-toxic energy, edge computing, decentralized energy grids. Like, I'm really skeptical about what these new nanotechnology resources are that they have planned and how safe they actually are, and how, the biological engineering that they're going to happen, that it doesn't end up in some like horror flick kind of model. I think a lot of it is weaponized narrative. And so they can sort of say anything is sustainable, even if we're creating, re-engineering bacteria, which is, my friend Steffer sent me a clip right before this started. It was a company in Houston that's doing carbon sequestration by essentially designing like designer bacteria to consume carbon and then create chemicals that are used for industrial chemical processes. And to me, that doesn't actually seem like that much of an answer, that essentially you're re-engineering one form of life under the name of carbon sequestration to make chemicals, massive batches of chemicals for some other purpose. It seems really strange. It's just like it's like a market. So anyway, that's where I think CIPRA is. I don't know that CIPRA is still going on. I think it was initial seed money for these deals, which, in the idea of real markets, none of this stuff would work. Like, there's not a demand for these pay for success deals. The only demand is that actually they must happen or global capital will all get gummed up because there won't be anywhere to put their money. So in the meantime, they get money for these pilot projects and money from grants, from foundations to get it going, to prop it up until the time comes that we have to adopt them.
Okay, Alice, I'm going to try something here. I'm going to switch your screen view because I want you to be able to see the map. What do you see on your screen now? You see both of us?
I see. Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to switch over here. I found the map, your Texas map. So I thought I would just. Oh, whoops. Let me cut to this. Do you see the map, Allison?
I do. It's a little blurry, but.
Oh, okay. There's a lot going on here, but you can see here. I can scroll through. This is the map, you guys, that Allison is making. I think of like the old, like the where they have like the guys in his room with the strings and the little pins, covering the wall. Like, this is connected to this and this. So
it's like my mind map. It helps me remember everything is.
Yeah, I mean,
I would have to say too, I want to give credit to our friend Lynn Davenport in Dallas, because Lynn is amazing in her field research and her advocacy around education. And so, a lot of the information in here started off because Lynn has an eagle eye for going to public meetings and reading the newspapers and showing up to give testimony in her Dallas, which is the smart city testbed. And before we went down, we did some field work on my YouTube channel. Jason's been doing some awesome work putting together the clips. We spent a week split between Austin and Houston, and we were doing field work there. But right before, we were in Dallas, and the night before, and we went to this place called Pegasus Park, which is a hub of biotechnology and essentially social impact and education reform. And so Lynn and I poked around there. It's somewhere like in the middle, like Lyda Hill, and near there. And we spent the afternoon walking around, and So we were looking into Pegasus, which I don't know. I'd never known like the origin of Pegasus, you know, the white flying horse. But evidently Pegasus sprung out of Medusa's head when Perseus cut off her head and the blood squirted out. And like, that's how Pegasus was born. And so my grand challenge, which I keep putting off because I keep adding more stuff to the map, is that I want to essentially present this map in the context of a Greek mythology, like a narrative of an ongoing series of connecting Dallas, big oil, energy futures, human capital interests against the backdrop of Greek and Roman mythologies centered on Pegasus and then spinning out. So,
yeah. And so I bring that up because we don't need you on here twice. Okay. I bring that up just because I think one of the things that happens is like, you know, there are a lot of people out there like in the media space that just keep kind of making generic statements, or they're like a lot of times they're not really adding anything new, and it's like I just find it fascinating, like how detailed your research, because you actually dig into like, oh, there's this organization, this is what they're doing, and they're connected to these people, and this is their relationships to all these people, and I think that's really valuable to add to, you know, like it's not just like, so it's not like someone's just making a statement like, oh, this thing's happening, it's the fourth industrial revolution and they're taking over the world, which I am guilty of myself. But you're like, no, it's this company, and they're connected to this foundation and this bank, you know. It's like it makes it concrete, you know. But it's like not everyone has the time to do that work, or even to, you know, I think sometimes people's bandwidth, it gets overwhelming. Like I know a lot of people, when I send them your videos, they're just like, it was like too much. Like, what? Just like, it's too much. Give me the Reader's Digest thing or whatever. And it's just like, but I think we have to like change our mindset around that. We have to say like, no, we need to actually study this. Like, we need to actually understand what's going on, and not just look for like who has the best marketing of trying to sell this. Is like, no, we need to actually take this very seriously. This is like, you know, our lives and life itself is at stake. And you know, I knew Steven Zarlenga, who was a monetary reform guy, and what he would always do is like, do your homework. He started like, do your homework. That was just his big thing. So, you know, anyways, I just wanted to bring up that map because I saw it. I was like, holy cow, but you've got tons of these maps. Actually, that's just one. And you're on a different platform there as well. I mean,
they wipe me off a little, sis. Yeah. Who knows how long this one will last? It's backed by Omidyar and Hewlett Packard. So
yeah, I'm sure. Well, that's the problem, is we're all using their tools. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all DARPA. It's all their tools. You know, even this, what I'm using here, is their tools. So. Okay, so let's take another question. From your observations, what do you believe are the odds another prosecution of the Nazis' Nuremberg 2.0 trials will become a reality and successfully prosecute the mass murderers?
I would say if you look at Operation Paperclip, that's probably my answer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just look up Operation Paperclip.
They picked a few that they're gonna do a public show trial on, and then they recruited the rest. And by the way, they funded them. They funded the Nazis in the first place. So that's another thing. Like, everybody wants to talk to me about like war, you know, because I'm very anti-war, and like, yeah, but you know, we had to do World War II, you know, I was like, well, actually, if you look at how that whole thing came about, Adolf Hitler was installed and the Nazis were put into power to serve a particular purpose. So that's a whole nother conversation. Question for Allison and Jason. Ooh, I answer them anyways. So. How does the Bank of International Settlements head Augustine Carson's public statement about central bank digital currencies, "We obtain total control," match the reality? I mean, I think I can try to answer that. The reality is that they will have, I mean, I wouldn't say total control, because no matter what they set up, people are always, you know, finding ways to circumvent it. You know, no matter what, you know, I don't think they'll ever have total control, as much as they want to try. And even with all their best stuff, people will always try to find ways around it. But they can have a heck of a lot control. And I would say that if they actually implement if they actually accomplish getting people to use central bank digital currencies around the world, the amount of control they will have will be greater than any body has ever had in the history of, at least our recorded history of humanity. Like they will have more control. Central bank digital currencies will give them more control than has ever existed in human history. That's my perspective. They will not have total control. They'll never have total control. There'll always be people figuring out ways around, and they'll people outside the system. But I will argue that the CBDCs are like quite literally the greatest threat to people's liberty, let alone, you know, the ecological consequences of it too, because what happens when you have a handful of people with that much power. So Allison, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would just add that I think it's important to realize the amount of data and metadata that's attached to our use of currencies, which I think in the future, again, will be less and less about what we currently understand money as, and more like, Jason, what you talked to me about, freedom tokens. You know, that you have these tokens that give you rights to do things, that it's going to be more in line with that, and that the tokenized economies, the tokenized behavior economies, especially, I think will, as they start to apply to media consumption as well, because this will go into how we log into the internet. You know, the IMF was asking for that unique identifier for internet logins. Is that I think the concept of the digital twinning will go into overdrive, because they will be able to not only control and track it, but actually mirror that back into the twinning simulation. And so the control will both be overt in terms of like, yes, you can, or no, you cannot use your resources in the way you desire them because we have some outside say. But even when you're using the assets, whether you're making material purchases or using them to access experiences or opportunities, or to do things that you want to do, that is going to be feeding into these AI machine learning systems, and both towards the singularity as well as towards as I was mentioning, the signals intelligence aspect of both financial markets and military strategy.
Keep forgetting. The freedom tokens thing. That was a children's book idea that I had years ago. I wanted to write a children's. I was like, I need to simplify this, like how to understand money, like how money works. And the idea of freedom tickets or freedom tokens came to mind, where it's like your freedom is determined by the tokens that you have, which is essentially true. What you can do, what your access is controlled by these things, these fictional things that you don't have the power to create. You can earn them from someone else, but you don't actually create them. When people say, oh, I made this much money, you didn't make any money. The money was made by the bank, and then we're just trading it back and forth. But I just thought that idea of a freedom ticket or a freedom token was pretty funny, because just it's like it kind of goes against the idea of, like, at least what I thought of as freedom before I came across Stephen Newcomb's work, thanks to you, Allison. Like free. I thought I equated freedom with liberty, and they don't equate. They're actually, freedom are really privileges that have been awarded you by the state or by the powers that
things you can do under the dome,
or the dome. But then there's the dome of the bank. So the dome of the bank is determining a lot. And again, once some CBDCs get involved, that dome is going to expand to a greater degree than has ever happened. So someone asked about blockchain, if we had thoughts on Panquake. I'm not familiar with Panquake, a social platform being built by Bill Binney and Susie Dawson. So I don't have any thoughts on that. I don't know what that is, actually.
My position is on blockchain is it's all about the ledgers. And
my thought on even like the cryptos is just like, I actually think that we need to digitize our lives, and that's something I heard Catherine Austin Fitz say the other day, but I think that I like the way that she put that, is like we need to get away from smartphones. Like honestly, like we need to get away from this technology. We need to reduce. I'm not saying completely eliminate it, but I'm kind of I'm kind of the position that like I will never have an identity, a digital identity. Like I will just live outside the system or whatever. But that's one thing, line in the sand, that I've drawn. I refuse to have a digital identity. And I know that there will be consequences to me making that decision, but I think that that's just a line that I think people need to make that.
I mean,
that's a line you shouldn't
the
cross.
thing is, though, I think that they'll make you have them. Like once these impact markets come online, is that you'll have to have a phone to pay, like your welfare payment, your food stamps will be on a phone. Like you
Right.
will not have another option.
But we
like
need a movement where we reject that, because
we have
once
to
we're in there,
understand that.
yeah, we're trapped.
Yeah.
That is the trap.
I would also say, like, I really love Bill Binney's stuff, but as I've gotten a little bit more mature about like the nature of state power, I don't think that you probably ever get to totally be an ex NSA, like, ex CIA or
I
ex
agree.
that, this is someone who he was a very talented cryptographer, and he devoted his career to that. And I know that he's done some important whistleblowing work. But my personal experience is based on like, beware the conversion story. The people who were deeply embedded in the systems, I think it's very hard to imagine that they're going to be the ones to lead the way out.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about,
as much as I do really respect him and his work, and it really helped me in the place I was at a few years ago. But it's kind of like, even with Snowden, when I was hearing him, the last time I listened, it was sort of like he just wanted NSA, like a more accountable NSA. No, that's not me anymore. That's not who I am anymore.
Right. Well, and again, if we're honest, we're dealing with organizations that assassinate people. That's all you need to know. Like, these are dishonest. I don't know if anybody's seen what was the clip with the ex-CIA director? I can't remember which one, but he was like laughing, and he was like, we would lie, cheat, and steal and murder, like, and he's like laughing, and then the whole audience is laughing with him. There's this clip online, and like, that's who you're dealing with. Like,
Yeah.
you're not forget about it. Yeah, there's nothing there there's absolutely no integrity there to even I'm not as familiar with Bill Binney as you guys. I haven't delved too much into his
There's
stuff.
a really good clip with Laura Poitras, who again now I'm somewhat suspect of.
She has. I'm like, why does this person have this much access? Like, someone has a lot of access, and they're getting a lot of media coverage.
The New York Times too.
I have red flags go off. So, but who knows? Go ahead. Sorry.
I wouldn't have known about Bluffdale if it weren't for Bill Binney and that Laura Poitras clip. So I learned some stuff. Like, you can always learn things from people. You just have to be cognizant of like the context.
Right. Someone asked, how can we help you most effectively, Allison?
Oh, that's nice. Well, I would just say, like, I think we need horizontal movement. So the extent I really am appreciative of people hopping online today and joining the conversation. I know that this is complicated and a steep learning curve. I'm no expert. Like, I'm just a person who digs in and reads a lot of stuff, but you don't have to be, anybody could be me. Anybody could do this stuff I do. It's not, you don't need any special, I mean, you probably need the internet, unfortunately, but like, you don't need any special talents to it. So I would say, like, if the frame that I offer, which is keepers of natural life, understand histories of domination around Indigenous people and relationships to natural systems, looking at structural resolutions and systems of power, looking at big pictures, looking in your own local community and trying to build something that is better, not just for your own immediate sphere, but broadly. Like, and not in the metaverse and not on blockchain. Like, if those things make sense to you, like, figure out a way to pitch those where you are. And I know some people already are doing that. And I was really grateful for Jason to provide input and Raul to do the great graphic design of the Nefli brochures that we took with us to the blockchain conference in Texas. And I've shipped out about 20 boxes of those for people to hand out as conversation starters, because I think we have to start the conversation somewhere. But I would figure out like how to tell it the way you would tell it. Tell the story the way that you would tell it, and tell it to as many people as possible. Tell it to bankers in coffee shops, or, you know, whomever. Because I think the more we tell people, you plant these seeds, and then maybe a year later, people are like, wow, that the thing that crazy lady on the sidewalk told me actually really is happening now. Maybe I should pay attention, because I really think that what we need is a horizontal movement. And yeah, like I'm still collecting dandelions. I would have to say, like, the past, like since late summer has been hard on me, and I've been regrouping a lot, and I'm trying to figure out how to get back into my blog, the writing part, because I feel like the first year I felt like I had the story that I wanted to tell about impact investing and how it was a much bigger story than it was being told within the health space. And, you know, I ran around sort of chasing ahead, trying to feel this imperative of speed to let everybody know. And, you know, it's been 18 months, but it hasn't really sunk in, like, to people. Like, a few people, you know, and not like I was doing it to make money or to be some big personality, but like literally trying to navigate these challenging, disconnected narratives and insert myself and insert my frame, which is again like a tiny subset of the resistance. I was like, gosh, what am I doing? Like, I could just still keep writing little bits here and there about things, but is that what I want to be doing? So I'm still figuring all of this stuff out. My next project is going to be to try to write the mythology of Dallas and Pegasus Park, and to work on this glossary over the summer. I've stepped away from my job, so I'm doing that. But it, you know, I'm also sort of falling into the metaverse, which isn't super healthy either. And I've disconnected from a lot of social media. I'm still on Twitter, and I'm still on Telegram. So yeah, so we're all working it out. I think it's such a marathon. I think everybody's pretty exhausted. So just like maybe think some good thoughts for me and for all of us, that we hold on to things, steer, you know, keep up the good, you know, good energy as much as possible. Cause, you know, Jason, he's been, you know, struggling with being, you know, exhausted for a month and under the weather. And we're all just like, oh my gosh, what do we do next? So yeah, I guess spread the word, and don't feel like you have to know all of the things to start. Like, don't think that you have to be perfect at it to start the conversation. Because me, I think what's most interesting is just literally in that coffee shop with the college kids, I'm like, look up the internet of bio-nano things. And I don't even have to tell you how to talk about it. Just look it up. Like, you know, there's stuff. And if you can find a few key things that are beyond the health conversation to like drop in, just say like, if you're interested, let's talk about this. Because, you know, I think this moonshot project is a little bit overwhelming. Like, what do you think that the Department of Energy is doing this? Like, what do you think of this idea of, you know, synthetic biology that is beyond the role of like clinical trials for cancer? You know, what do we think about the idea of engineering organisms to be like living building materials? Should we be doing that? Like, do that in your churches, do that in your community groups. Like, there are huge ethical and moral conversations that should be happening that aren't happening. And I would say the other thing is try to get out of your boxes and like be open to talking to other people who maybe don't fit exactly your narrative. Other than blockchain, no, just kidding. But like, try to get out of the boxes a little bit, because like I said, I have a very eclectic group of people. It's not super chatty on Twitter. It's not really that kind of thing, but I think people are interested and they're trying to figure it out. So like, maybe take risks on people that people have more in common than you think.
Yeah, and I think the challenge too is it's not something that you can just, you know, I would send videos. I'm like, oh, I sent someone a video of yours. They're like, oh, I'm not going to watch a 5-hour video. And I'm like, well, I edited it down from 10 hours. Does that help? But here's the problem: is to actually understand this actually takes time. It actually takes some real time and focus to like actually think about what this means. I mean, I'm still processing, like, what does this mean? What is this new system? What does it mean? What is it going to look like? What are all the implications here? And it's not something where you can like send someone a 5-minute video, like, with cartoon characters and like, bam, they're going to get it. You're having to people have to, because people's worldview, their foundational worldview has to change in order for them to understand this new system, because a lot of people's foundational beliefs are actually wrong. And that's a really, really, really hard thing to overcome with people. You mean we don't live in a democratic republic? So
Well,
I
it's
don't know.
interesting because Raul just had on his Twitter feed, there was, I think, a big thing that just came about. Someone had set up like a blockchain token auction where people would put in to like secure a copy of the Constitution for the people. And whatever the copy that was being auctioned off, the folks who had set up this blockchain fund, they didn't get it. They didn't actually they didn't get the winning price. And then they had all this money and they have to figure out how to give it back. And, but then there's like fees and associated costs. And so, I think that really hits to the point, like early on, this person I learned a lot from, and we've since gone our different ways, but his name is Tim Scott, and he wrote a piece for Dissident Voice called The Duplicitous Constitution. And so it was actually looking at the structure of the Constitution and the way it was written, and the Bill of Rights being set aside, and then it was negative rights, not affirmative rights. And that really the structure of it was to enhance the rights of landed white men for the most part. Like if you actually go through and look at the Constitution, like that's, and sure, there's some rights, like resources to take your case up to the Supreme Court, like then you might be able to get your rights, but like you actually have to have a huge amount of resources to claim the rights that you supposedly have under the Constitution. And then, this is kind of close to my heart because being in Philadelphia, when you look at most of the founding fathers, the vast majority of them were also Freemasons. Many of them were land speculators. And so, my awakening to this from the school closure moment was both seeing the future, which at this point hadn't gone as far as to like the cyborg avatar capitalism that you're going to live as an avatar, from the Japan Moonshot Project. But it was like this somewhat of a transhumanist, like futurist worldview, but then reconciling it with the doctrine of domination knowledge that Tim had written about and Stephen Newcomb had spoken of very clearly, and reconciling these two things. And it was a lot. Like when you say it doesn't happen quickly, it doesn't. Like there was probably a good year and a half where like you feel really bad. It hurts to like let go of things you thought you knew. It hurts to feel betrayed. It hurts to like, and then once you know all of the things that aren't right, like, about Operation Paperclip. Oh yeah, we didn't actually get the Nazis in the trials. They all went to Alabama to run the space program. Like once you start to reckon, then your ground gets unsteady. And then you're like, well, what do I have to lean on? And, and I think in that respect, that's where we have to come to terms with our own like self, our own groundedness in, faith practice, God, the universe, that which is beyond ourselves, that we have a destiny, that we're here to do something, to do important work, and that it's happening outside of most of the constructs that we identified with. But there's mourning that goes along. There's like grief that doesn't happen. You don't just like watch a video or read a meme and then you're there. It's a process. It's a big process. And so I think my positioning early on, and this is like, I have to hurry up and write all these things to tell the people what's really happening, which is where I was a year ago. I'm in a different place now. So part of this is like, it's your own journey. Everybody's on their own journey. And I'm like, don't believe me. If stuff that I say is helpful to you, pick it up, use it, work with it, as long as hopefully you don't use it to hurt other people, but make it yours and move on, because we're all doing, I have no answers for other people. I can only do for me, and for what makes sense, and I don't always do it right for me. So.
Well, we've got a few more questions. Do you have a little bit more time? We can maybe run through these. Maybe not spend so much time on each question. I don't know how you're
Sure.
doing, if you have time, but maybe, okay, why don't I read a few of them at once, and then I'll have
Okay.
you respond, and then I'll read. That way looks like I've got like 6 or 7 more here. Are you familiar with the research of Dr. Martin Paul or Shimon Yanowitz? Another question is, real quick, asking about the World Economic Forum setting up home base in Detroit. Is there, there's a lot of poverty there, and so like the significance of them setting up in Detroit. Another question is, it sounds like we should research our local community to find connections, follow the money. Do you have a tutorial or training on research, how you do research, or maybe advice on
I
that?
probably should try to do that. Maybe that'll be a part that I'll build into my map.
Do you want to just answer those 3, and then we'll take?
Well, I don't
3
know
more?
the first 2 researchers, so like if maybe if someone has information about that, no, those aren't people I'm familiar with. But if you think it's relevant, or maybe you can tell Jason what field that they're in. I'm not familiar with those names. And the Detroit. So Detroit's very interesting. I don't know. I did actually a couple of podcasts, and I owe Andy, Eduardo, and Kenny another one on. We were looking at Diego Rivera and the Detroit Art Institute murals centered on this vaccine panel. And so I did a lot of research looking into Detroit and the Ford family. So clearly the Ford Foundation is very central. Now it's in New York, but the Ford Motor Company, Edsel Ford, set it up before he died. So that has Detroit ties. And I'm not sure. I think it's either maybe Kresge is Detroit area-ish. But Michigan also has a lot of military installations, and University of Michigan is a huge research institution with the technology sector. So I would need to look into that a little bit more. One of the labs that I was looking at in Dallas is called the Zyvex labs, and they were early advancements in the 1990s around molecular assembly. And so they were working with the National Nanotechnology Initiative in 2007 on a report about like a roadmap for for nanotechnology in the U.S. And it was underwritten by Battelle, I think, but Rick Snyder was part of it, like the later the governor of Michigan. So, and there's a lot of poverty, and then there's a lot of open land. And, I'd really actually like to go to Detroit, because I was looking at a documentary that someone had shared with me about these maybe it was the Packard plant. And I think at one point there was either a Spanish company or maybe a Mexican company that was looking at investing in this Packard plant. And there was a bit of the documentary where he was walking through, essentially sort of saying like it would be its own city. And so I'm imagining these future Build Back Better, gulags, for lack of a better word, that are like co-working, co-living, co-educational spaces where we, build the metaverse and then live in virtual reality headsets. And so I think both the privatization of what's happened in Michigan. Oh, the other piece of this is the DeVos Acton Institute free market stuff is going on in Michigan as well. So there's a bunch of pieces going together in Detroit. The policing, high level policing, privatization, dispossession, histories of brownfields, open land for redevelopment. Like I could see that it would definitely be one of these sort of equity. And also I would say the thing that I came across in my work around Diego Rivera and the murals, Detroit had a early pharmaceutical industry with Park Davis. It had the cars, but then it's also Motown. And so I think a lot of what we're seeing too is the weaponization of frequency. So yeah, there's a lot of layers. I think I might have to spend some time doing some research into that institute in Detroit. And Jason, I'm sorry, I forgot the other. There's the researchers, there was Detroit, and then what was the third question?
I am sorry,
I
but
lose?
I actually deleted the question. I've been deleting them as I
Oh,
read them.
oh no,
Uh,
no, no, no.
because
Oh, let me see
yeah,
if I remember. It was Detroit.
we could rewind. No. I'm my bad. I should have left it. I shouldn't have deleted. I just trying to
I'm
keep,
sorry. I'm
I'm trying
never
to
good
keep
at
my
remembering.
I'm trying to keep my space clean here to keep track of
I
everything.
know.
It's
I feel bad.
that's all right. Well, if
Do
we
you
didn't answer
remember?
that,
Does
I
it stick in
don't.
your head?
I'm focused on trying to.
You're doing too many things. I'm sorry.
That's
Maybe
all
it'll come
right.
back to me. Maybe only give me 2 at a time.
Yeah, maybe we'll do 2 at a time. If whoever asked that question, whatever that
You can
didn't get
put it back
answered,
on.
just throw it back up there and I'll grab it. Sorry about that. It's hard to, it's hard because there's conversations that are happening, and then I'm trying to read through the conversations and trying to find the question. I mean, we do have people putting question now.
I appreciate it,
It's getting
Jason.
easier, but it's also like kind of hard to keep track of. But so like, okay, we'll do some more. Sorry about that if we missed your question. Was it Detroit? We talked about Detroit, right? Yeah.
I got Detroit, and I got the.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so digital ID related to straw man material. Is digital ID related to any of the straw man material? And I don't know how well you've gone into.
I mean, I've been saying for months that I think it is, and I mean, I think that the problem is that the digital ID is connected to the digital twinning, and it's intimately connected to blockchain. and my understanding is that it would be your blockchain, your electronic, your digital wallet is sort of like your umbilicus between the real world and the metaverse world, and it's like you pass through, and the assets that you hold and your actions and whatever are tracked across the portal through your digital wallet, and thusly building your straw man with this interoperable granular data that builds on the blockchain. Now, what I find is interesting is that many people who are in that space about personal sovereignty and the straw man are also deeply embedded into the blockchain crypto space. So they really have no incentive to question the overall construct of what this blockchain actually is beyond their digital gold assets. They like, to me, it would be the most logical thing for the people who are involved in the sovereignty movement to really dig into, like, what is going on with digital twinning and how does it pair up with the strawman argument? Because I think in some ways the digital twin on blockchain is essentially just like the surfacing in a very much clearer intentional way of the strawman concept, the idea that there are global forces that are trading on your identity sort of in secret, and that maybe now with pay for success finance and central bank digital currency and your digital twin, they'll just start to bet on you through your digital twin as an asset. But unfortunately, and I guess it's not super surprising that group of people, because of their ties largely to the crypto space, I'm not really seeing that conversation coming up. If anybody knows of folks in the sovereignty space having that conversation around digital twins and blockchain identity, I'd love to hear it, because to me it seems perfectly logical. But I don't really find the idea of court systems, like resolving this through court systems, to have a lot of, it seems really complicated. It seems highly problematic in that people have like gone to jail around like not paying their taxes and other things. It seems like to do that is a commitment of time and money beyond what I'm willing to put into it. So I don't claim to be an expert at it. But if there are people who have done that work who could comment more directly on the digital twinning, I would be up for hearing it. I just haven't heard it yet.
Yeah, I'm kind of the position that the whole system is thoroughly corrupt at every level, and we need to move forward with that understanding. The idea that there's some fair play or anything, I've completely lost any faith or belief in the system at all. Okay, so what's a good entry point for parents involved with education? And then I'll do another one. why do people automatically respond with, do you want fiat currency if you criticize crypto? Even if you're not making that argument, do they only talk solutions because they don't understand the problem? Okay, so I'm not sure if you want to answer
Okay,
that one
so
or
that,
not, but
well, don't go too far. Those are so
okay, we'll stop there.
yeah. So as far as on the education side of things, I would say what I anticipate seeing in the coming next few years is a ramping up of data harvest of children in school settings. And so it's going to go beyond simply the academic cognitive skill data that we were seeing in benchmark testing and standardized testing. It's going to include a lot more surveys for social, emotional, and behavioral data. And I would refuse all of that. And there's a report by someone called Clive Belfield at Teachers College, Columbia University, which is called like the economic return of social emotional curriculum. And in there, they actually have an equation that has lists an 11% return on investment on social emotional learning curriculum in programs. It's disgusting. And so I would say anybody like who their school is adopting a social emotional learning curriculum, like take that report and say, this is about creating global financial markets in children's behavior and it's grotesque, and stop that. And then if you can't stop it at a district level, definitely stop it your children from having any survey data taken on them on their behavior. For me, back in the day, like we got out of Google Classroom, this Google took over our school district emails, and increasingly, even this is 4 years ago, when my child was in high school, like the teachers were all assigning all their work through Google Classroom. I would say, avoid that. Like we actually opted out of Google Classroom, but it was at a detriment to my child because often the teachers wouldn't even post the homework other than on a Google Doc. It was a real problem. And this is like at a magnet high school in Philadelphia. I would say the amount of data harvest that's coming with testing, biological testing systems. There are many problems with data collected on testing of children in classrooms. Early on, there was a blockchain testing platform in California with Kahala Biosciences. But even the nose swab testing, I have a lot of concerns, and I know Michael Kane, who is a teacher in New York City, had actually taken them to court. I guess it wasn't even the school district, it was the Department of Hygiene that was managing the data access, the data analytics. But try to keep the kids' data, like their biological data, their behavioral data, their cognitive data, out of the system. And then I would say, interrogate this idea of pay for success finance. It's embedded in the Every Student Succeeds Act. If you're starting to see things like Clever, which is a QR code login for multiple interoperable online learning systems, like interrogate that. And the challenge is that if we step out of it, which I know many people are tempted to do, and I don't second guess anybody's choices, but the reality is their goal is to fully break the public system and then leave everyone to their own devices, literally, and then to give them a digital voucher on blockchain and then tell them, you can just do Pokemon Go education. And here's some great online learning systems, and you can supplement it with horseback riding or going to the gym or going to the museum, and then you can check in with your QR code there and log some skill points. And so essentially, once we do that, every single resource in our communities that traditional unschooling and homeschooling parents used to use will be co-opted into the system because they'll be feeding data analytics back based on the digital voucher. So it will be an entire containment of the entire public sphere. Like it won't be homeschooling like you imagined it used to be. And mostly the amount of money you're going to get, you're not going to be able to buy all that much. You're going to mostly, the kids' education is going to have to be online with Khan Academy anyway. So I would say try to fight for the public system. The challenge is that the teachers, for the most part, and especially the teachers unions, that the leadership of the unions are totally sold out on all of this. If you can try to articulate I have a really good article on my blog to the Chicago Teachers Union. I mean, but they're so crooked. They're so crooked. You know, I wrote like 3 years ago saying this is pay for success finance. Like, I know that you want wraparound services for poor kids in your schools, but this is what it really means. If you're having data collected on them, especially medical data or behavioral health data in schools, it's not protected by HIPAA. It's only protected by FERPA, which is much less solid protection, and Obama gutted it on purpose for impact markets. So like, just try to educate people how like having social service systems in schools for convenience is actually putting families in harm's way, because it's going to be setting them up for impact commodities, and it's going to be setting them up for behavioral profiling and compliance profiling. And then theoretically, as much as people have been saying we want to remove the police from the schools and bring in social workers, I would say the flip side is that I'm sure many social workers are very caring people, because you don't go into social work unless you actually care about people. But the reality is that their job is to act as an extension of the state. And so increasingly, as economic realities become more precarious, as health edicts come down harder, parents who are just trying to do the right thing by their children could easily start to get caught in the crosshairs of something deemed on the official ledgers as negligent, and having their children taken away from them. So these are all things, I think, in the public education space that people need to be familiar with. Micro schools is another piece that I'm going to be talking about in my Texas, is that's, some hybrid between public school and online homeschooling is going to be these private models that will be sold to sort of, progressive, Montessori-esque, but it will still be mostly online learning. So that's the school stuff. And then
the second one, I could actually maybe answer it, and then if you want to add to that. The question was, whenever someone criticizes crypto, someone says, "Oh, do you want fiat or what?" They're just like, "Oh, you like the current system or whatever." And I would just say that, they only talk to solutions because they don't understand the problem. Just my experience with that is that's just a tactic it's an avoidance tactic. That's just my view, because if you want to actually dig into, well, the whole fiat thing, when I first started getting into studying monetary issues, that was like the big deal. Like, we can't have fiat. Fiat was like, all money is fiat. Money is fake. All money is fiat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a stupid thing anyway. Like, I moved on from that thing anyways, just because all money is fiat. It's, yeah, I would just say that that's a tactic to avoid actually delving in and actually having a real conversation about that.
I mean, for me, I would say ask people about the blockchain, because that's where the conversation has to be had. Crypto is just one use case of the blockchain, but it's central. You can't have crypto without the blockchain. And so with crypto comes every use of the blockchain, which you would think at this point with the medical passports, people would start to make sense of it.
Right.
But they're not separate. It's an integrated package. Always has been.
Right. And let me just clarify, when I say all fun money is fiat, a lot of people are like, oh, gold, because it's a real thing, it's a physical thing, and there's only so much of it. I mean, that's just idiotic, because we don't even know how much gold there is in the world, and we had a Great Depression under the gold standard, and we still had the fractional reserve system. I mean, you delve into it, a lot of the conversations that happen within the monetary reform space are actually still way off. But that's a whole nother, I need to do
There's a good book that I've actually been listening to it as an audiobook called Gold Warriors, about Japan's like imperial holdings, like in the Philippines, of all these stashes of gold, and the way the US like accessed those hoards of gold in the Philippines, Marcos. And yeah, I mean, there's so much gold you don't even know, and it's all controlled. Like it's all controlled.
I mean, that's why like I have such an issue with the gold and silver people that are like, oh, we should go back to gold and silver. I'm like, you know who controls all that? Like all money should never have value in and of itself, ever. And it should, if you're going to use it, it's all it is a representation of something that someone did. And it needs to be, I think it needs to be small scale in communities, like, it works in a smaller community of like, oh, keeping track of like a ledger of people did this for this. But even then, like, I'm even open to the idea of like in a community small enough, you don't even need money anyways, because people just help each other out. But that's a long, I need to do more on the monetary thing, because it's something that I've got a lot, actually a large number of these books on the shelf behind me are actually about the history of money, and but it's a really complicated issue because you're dealing with an abstract as well as there's a lot of layers to it. Let me try to get through some of these. The third question before that we forgot to answer was just about training. You doing a training on local money and organizations.
Oh,
Yeah, like if that was a possibility or something.
well, I mean, I did do like a little sys mapping tutorial, but
Oh,
I haven't done. I mean, I'm kind of thinking if what I can do is break out the Dallas, Texas scenario, because I think in many respects Dallas is like the playbook. And so, it's replicable. This stuff is, they need it to scale rapidly. Like they're not going to have custom solutions for every community. The idea of collective impact, the idea of these strive together, cradle to career, opportunity zones. Once you see the pieces and the moving parts, if you live in a mid-sized city and you know what to look for, you'll be able to find it. So I'm kind of thinking that gives more value to uh, the work that I'm doing in Dallas, because literally is a test bed for every single, it's, a headquarters for Texas Instruments, a national headquarters for AT&T. It's a big campus of Capital One credit cards. Like, it's many, many elements of both arts and culture and energy and academics. Like UT Dallas is one of the largest computer science schools in the country, which I wasn't that familiar with. It's a city of learning and badges and free college that's going to be tied to the blockchain ledger system, and defense contracting that goes back to the 50s in Austin, and there's in the Dallas Federal Reserve, and I mean there's just an infinite number of things. So I think if I can chunk out these different bits of this map to tell these different stories, then people will be able to like sort of mirror it. Maybe I'll have a frontispiece at the end to say like, these are all the parts. Can you find this? We can do a seek and find or whatever, like maybe an online collaborative space. Where did you find?
yeah, make a game out of it.
Where is your urban farm tiny house campus?
And you can win dandelion tokens. I'm
Yeah.
kidding. I'm kidding. I made a link to this map. I added the link to earlier to some of these things. Anyways, I added a link.
I mean, it's probably not the most useful. I just kept building on it. I just kept making it bigger and bigger. But
yeah, it looks like you spent
it's a good bibliography.
couple of minutes on it. Pretty funny.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Let's go run through some more questions here. Also, someone had mentioned someone had mentioned David Graeber's book. I just wanted to say his book is good about just the general idea of debt. There's a lot of great stuff in David Graeber's book. He clearly does not understand the current monetary system and any of the debates within monetary reform. His book is actually terrible if you actually want to understand the monetary system, but it's really great for understanding the concept of debt. Especially from like an anthropological standpoint. And his book, The Myth of Barter, is like everyone needs to read that chapter, because a lot of our economic, there's stories. There's a story of like, oh, we all did barter and it got too complicated. Turns out that story is a total myth. But like there's no society that actually operated on barter that they've ever been able to discover. But it was a convenient story to sell the idea of the creation of money, when actually the creation of money was created to do exchanges with the enemy initially, or to pay things that are really unpayable, like I killed your brother, but this doesn't replace your brother, but here's something. Anyway, why do people automatically? Okay, we already did that. Ask Allison about bearer instruments. They had the bankers directly interfere and make laws in a couple of states, like the Dakotas and South America, and in the South Americas, I think in South America.
I don't.
Do you
I'm
know
not familiar with that.
bearer
No,
instruments?
do you know about it, Jason?
I'm not familiar with bearer instruments. Next time I do a thing with John Titus, I can ask him if he's familiar with that. But yeah, I'm not familiar with bearer instruments myself.
I mean, is it like linked to some sort of contracting, like a coded?
I don't know.
I mean, because
anything about
that's
bearer.
Yeah, I
Bearer
don't know what it
instruments.
is. I would say, like, for me, the next phase that people need to understand is, like, if it's yeah, I don't know if it has anything to do with the bearer instruments, but I think the smart contracting and smart environments and metaverse is really central.
Okay.
Just
Um,
quoted.
do you have any suggestions for people to maintain their sanity in this global crimes against humanity nightmare continues? How do people remain sane? You probably shouldn't ask people that are insane. No. Uh,
I mean, I will admit, like, I have been struggling the last like few months. Like, been it's hard to keep your bearings. Like, I've had personal losses and things that felt like betrayals that were maybe just meant to be learning experiences, and regroupings, and so yeah, I'm no great model. I need some more like dandelion power. I think I'm also probably vitamin D deficient. Winter is never my best moment. I promise tomorrow I'm I'm working on a quilt. So gonna get back to that, and sometimes feeling productive, like I've actually done some concrete things. You know, I try not to live in the doomsdayer space. Like, I try to like look at things with clear eyes and think at the same time, the world doesn't, I don't think the world ends the way they think they want it to end. I think that if we can figure out a way to tell a story that resonates with people, that and says we shouldn't reprogram the world as engineered nanoparticle tissue to, benefit some rich warmongers, like, we could do that. And in fact, in some ways it could be an amazing opportunity to unify people. I would say, like, separate yourself out from things that are really a time and energy suck. Like, I have a very controlled way of managing my social media footprint, which not everybody approves of, but I'm pretty rigorous about how I engage in things. And so I would say, if you find yourself getting things that make you feel bad or make you feel disempowered, just don't do that. Stop that. And yeah, for me, I navigate this like a giant puzzle. I mean, you can probably tell with my giant map. Like, all of the things I find don't make me super depressed. Like, it's sort of like finding like beautiful things on a beach, and you're like, oh, here's another thing, and like, where should I put it, and thinking about it. Like, for me, I'm kind of getting through this because I don't have a lot of physical like world to be in, which is sad to me. But I try to keep my mind open and keep getting satisfaction in thinking about things, not in dire ways, but thinking about things in curious ways. And so I think for me, maybe that's another thing, is like, be curious. um as Cliff says, like, everything's okay. Like, at the end of the day, like, we'll all end up in the valley of love. There's something out there, like, no harm. It's gonna be all right. Like, we might have to walk through the zombie apocalypse. There's something, like, don't just get caught up in the zombie apocalypse part. There's something out there. So, like, be curious with the stuff that you find, and try to be clear, and try to find people who are supportive around you. And I guess that's probably been the lesson for me, is maybe less is more. Maybe the thing isn't to like try to be something for lots of people in the metaverse, but as finding a small group of people that you can help you on your journey.
Yeah, quality over quantity. Yeah, I've actually, on that question, I've had a hard time since all this started too. I mean, actually, the really like start 2016 was when I really just started to like everything just started to fall apart. It was just because I realized it was just untenable, and I started to, even the people that what would call my base, because I ran a documentary film festival, started to break apart because people were a lot of people were still holding on to like the hope of the Democratic Party, or more than anything, the fear, the fear of Donald Trump or whatever was a very powerful thing amongst uh, a lot of people that were like more on the left side of things. And so I've lost friends, and I've had a lot of tragedy happen within my life in the past couple of years. So it's really caught up with me. And the thing that's kept me sane, or the thing that keeps me sane, is going out in the woods and going out in the wilderness and being out in nature. That's the one thing that's actually kept me somewhat I'm some grounded, but I actually think I got sick this month because I think everything just caught up with me. I think it's just been overwhelming, and I needed to just lie down for a month. But anyway, so that's my thing is, like, and I think maybe everybody has their own thing or finds, something that you can focus on. But to me, it's like not a choice. It's like, this thing is coming and there's no way, like every ounce of my being is opposed to this thing. And it's not even a question. Like, there's no way I will ever submit to this, and I will always speak out against it. And I'm totally at peace with whatever happens. I'm not afraid of whatever happens, because I know I'm on the side of what's right, and even if we lose, like, I don't think this is a material battle. I don't think this is a material war. Like, I don't think you can even win on that front. I think there is something, I can't explain it. I don't know what it is, but I do think it's about maintaining an integrity, and keeping the torch of truth. I don't know. Okay, we just got a few more here. And then we'll call it quits. It's been a nice long run here. Thank you so much, Allison, for joining us. Just FYI, so this was the first one. We showed 1 hour of the interview. We're going to show the second part on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So check in with us Wednesday, and we probably won't go quite as long on the Q&A on Wednesday, just because it'll already be pretty late. But we'll at least get like an hour, maybe a little more in. We'll see how Allison's feeling, because she's on the East Coast and I'm 2 hours earlier. What do you think about all the athletes having heart attacks? And then I'll read another one too. Do you know who owns the Constitution Square and Liberty Bell? You might be shocked. I don't, but I mean, I always thought the Liberty Bell and was that I know that land is parks, the national parks. It's a national park, because my friend Allison got arrested at the my friend Sherry got arrested at the Liberty Bell, and it was the national parks people who arrested her, and she actually had a restraining order against her from going within so many feet of the Liberty Bell, which I think is hilarious. Ironic.
Yeah.
She was protesting around homelessness. So anyway, so there's that. Are you still doing a third installment of What's Left on Jose Clement Orozco?
I know, right? I need to get Orozco.
So do you want to answer those?
I do. I've been working on that Texas map. It sucked me in, but I promise I'll do that's for next week. I'm gonna prepare that. I'll prepare that next week. I'll make that commitment.
And did you have any thoughts on the athletes having heart attacks? It's unusual. I mean, that's very strange. Certainly should raise questions.
I mean, I think a lot of this stuff that we, I know it rubs people the wrong way, but my framing is still that what we're seeing is sort of a biocompatibility with nanotechnology effort, and that there is a lot of incidental harm that's done that will be used to advance secondary markets in health wearables and sensor technology and neural prosthetics. And so I think there are whole markets in like heart monitoring systems and biosensor systems. In fact, I think that there was somebody who I was connected with on Facebook who said, unfortunately, she had a family member that ended up with a heart condition, and then they were seeing in real time wearable technologies around heart monitoring coming online. So I think that there's market shaping that's happening around the neurological harm and cardiac issues. And it's very sad, clearly. Like, you don't want anybody to, death is sad. So I tend not to wade into the spaces that other people are broadly occupying, but that's what I would add, is that I think it's still not a mass death event, but I think it's about creating control systems to track the biocompatibility, and then it's about the wearables. And I don't know who owns those squares, other than I presumed it was the Park Service. And I know the Constitution Center has its own thing. but I don't know if they
Yeah,
have
that's
a
different
right
than
to
the
use that
Liberty
land.
Bell, I think.
I mean, if you want to chime in the chat, I'd be curious, but
Yeah,
I don't know right off the
share
bat.
that information. Um, do do you think there will be a watershed moment when enough people realize that all the grand narratives are a lie? Um, when people, I like the optimism. When enough people realize, I do think I don't know. Well, it's hard to say, but like, yeah.
I mean, I think part of it is sort of like getting a sense of like, how do I say it? Like, it's information warfare. I mean, I've talked about that quite a bit. And like the world is made of information. And there's more information than we can ever hold at once, unless you're like the D-Wave computers, or like there's too much information. And so we're always editing the information and how we access it to create reality. You know, like there could be like, you know, say I had a sibling that lived on this block of this street and their life was very similar to mine, but a little different. And their reality was different, even though many of the parameters were exactly the same. Like their experience of that reality was different because of how the mindset that they had or their past experiences. And so we're in the process of like learning and unlearning. And then now we've added to this whole thing of like deep fakes, right? Like what is real? Like can you program it? And then what is a deep fake in the metaverse? Can there be a deep fake in the metaverse if everything is fake? Like I'm having sort of these broader existential questions about reality. You know, because we, again, like Jason, you know, we had some understanding of what we thought reality was: reality about money, reality about government, reality about how society was built. And then wow, we found out there was all sorts of missing information that we didn't have that changes how we see that reality, and now it's different. You know, and I will say some of the challenges I've had with my immediate family is they're not in the same place as me, and you know, even my young adult child, and I can't tell them that they have to see the reality the way I have. Like it's just been my life experience, and they have to come to that to themselves or not. But doesn't make it not true. So yeah, so it's what is reality and how do people come to that awakening? So I guess I can just hope that enough of us are able to grapple with what it is to be like a coherent thinking being, as John Trudell would say, you know, in the world, right? We need to be coherent. We need to be clear and coherent. And it's not going to be everybody. Like I still don't think it's a numbers game in this. I think maybe it's that oh gosh, what is it, the morphic field, you know, the 100th monkey or something like that. I don't think it's millions, but I think for me, some people are like, I don't even want to know this. Like if I can't stop it, I'd rather not know it. Like why do you even spend time thinking about it if there's nothing you can do to change it? And I know a lot of us have family members that say things like that to us. Like if there's nothing to do about it, why do you even spend your time thinking about it? But I do feel like that it, as Jason has said, that it's a spiritual engagement, and that if there is some sort of greater force in the universe that has put out some of us to see something that is morally abhorrent and anti-life and a dominating, sinister, profane system that's masquerading as something benevolent or kind, that those of us who see it have to say something. Like maybe that's the big question. Maybe that's the question posed not to everybody, but just to some people for whatever reason, is that we're being put in a place to see it. And if we see it and we look away, then that door closes on what the opportunities are for some sort of larger reconciliation. And that's sort of where I'm at now, is that I don't think it's a numbers game. I think it's for some of us to do, and some of us for whatever reason, not that we're special or particularly talented. It's just maybe that's just fate, you know. But if we are given an assignment and we walk off our post, I feel like that there will be consequences for people more than just us. And so that it's selfish not to try, even though in doing the trying, it's actually feeling like something that you do at personal sacrifice. That's not just your sacrifice, but your family's. I know my family really resents a lot of what I do, and it's hard. It's a hard balancing act.
Well, I want to say something about the idea that's out there that we can't do anything about this, and I completely disagree with that perspective. I don't think we can fight this thing in the material world. Like, I think what needs to happen is a mass awakening in people's hearts and in their minds, and both heart and mind. You know, our minds are have been destroyed. Like, people don't think for themselves. They don't do any of their own research. They don't question their own thoughts. You know, I'm constantly questioning myself, and I know some people do. I know everyone does to a certain extent. I'm not like putting myself on a pedestal here or whatever. Like, I could have a whole series of shows about the problems with me, but but I think what needs to happen, what would Victor, I was like, what would success, what would a change look like? And it's a change in people like taking back their own mind and their own conscience, and being engaged in like the exact opposite of that idea. Like, I can't do nothing about it, I'm just going to ignore it, and I'm just going to focus on, you know, making money or whatever. You know, if there's a spectrum, whatever the opposite end of that is where we need to get to. And that means people saying, oh, I've actually learned about how this was made, and like all the shit, and how it's being used against me. And okay, maybe I'm still going to use it for the time being, but I'm aware of this. And I'm going to speak out against it. And there are lines that I will not cross. There are things where I'm going to say absolutely not. Like for me, it's a digital ID. Like, if it means I'm just going to be walking around like and not having access, that's just fine. Like, to me, like that's a line in the sand. Like, I'm not getting on your digital ID system. And if that means you're going to you're going to not allow me to have food, then I'm not going to have food. You know, like, that's just the line I've drawn. But for everyone, it's different. But what I'm saying is, if everyone quit believing, people still believe the media. People still believe and vote for these politicians. People are still listening to these billionaires, you know? And it's like, you have these institutions that have lied to you, and mass murderers. Like, people vote for mass murderers or these corporations. And so, like, when you know, not just in your head, but in your head and your heart, like, this is wrong. Like, this is, you know, people get all outraged, you know, about something that happens on a small scale here, yet something happens on a large scale that's happening every day and continues to happen, that they actually support. So people are upset about something that, you know, this media event that happened. It's not a media, you know, not necessarily a media event, but like something that the media is propping up as being this huge thing, which is, you know, it's an important thing in the people whose lives it affected, like the Rittenhouse thing or something. But I'm like, there is like mass murder going on. You're actually, you know, people vote for mass murderers, and then they're really upset, you know, and I'm not even going to get into the whole Rittenhouse thing or whatever, like, because it's a complicated thing. But my point is that there's attention being hoisted upon this thing, when over here there's, you know, you want to talk about like really horrible shit going on in the world that you're actually supporting, that we're supporting, I'm supporting, we're all supporting. And until we can, you know, recognize, like you said, it's like, no, this is wrong, and we need to speak out against this, or we need to at least acknowledge it. We can't just stick our heads in the sand and pretend like this isn't a thing, you know? Like, IBM is a really evil fucking corporation, you know? And all these companies, Amazon is real, and I'm still, like I said, I'm part of the problem. Like, I've watched Amazon movies or whatever, but I'm conscious of it, at least, and I'm willing to have that discussion. And I don't know, I'm kind of rambling here, but my point is the fact, as long as we're still under the spell, and as a metaphor, that's just a good way for me to describe it. It's like we're under a spell, and I am too, to an extent. You know, we need to break that spell and recognize the difference between the fiction and what's real. Not necessarily, excuse me, being able to really clearly identify that always, because it's very difficult in this media landscape. I'm going to take one more, and then we're going to call it good. And this one was actually to me, but I just wanted to address it real quick because someone put it up there. What do you think of MMA? I think they meant MMT. modern monetary theory, where we just have 100% fiat money and free printing of money. I do not support MMT. I think it's a co-opted, corrupt organization. The idea of printing money, it's a lot more complicated. Yeah, I do think money should just be printed, but like you and I should be able to create it. Like, it shouldn't just be the government. But as far as the government, like I totally oppose the government that we have, but I'm not opposed to having some sort of like commons or something. Like I don't even call it a government, but some sort of commons, and that commons organization or whatever can create the government or whatever can create as much money as it wants for roads and bridges and things we want. So I actually support we don't need taxes. Taxes are totally unnecessary. The point of taxes is actually to
Not engineered yeast.
not engineered yeast. Yeah. Well, and that's the challenge. Is like, okay, we want to we as a community. Oh my God, a communitarian. Because I said community. I do believe in community. I don't support these government institutions, and their use of community. But I do believe in real community, like Allison and I and everyone that's on here. In a way, we're community. But like we together say, hey, we want to build a road. Well, government can create money to build a road and pay people that have the resource that to take the time to do it. Money should never be an obstacle for anything that we want to do. The only obstacle should be the resources and the people, the labor willing to do it. Obviously, we don't want unaccountable, non-transparent, institutions creating money for war, for example. I mean, it's not an accident that the banks, the central bank, all the central bank creations always preceded a large war, and that's not an accident because they need to create money. It used to be they would tell the soldiers, come join our war and you can loot and you can keep what you loot or whatever, and then it got to the point where they figured out, oh, we can create money and have people exchanging this money, and we can create as much money as we want, so we can pay these soldiers. And I have a book back here on gold, The Measure of Gold. I think it's the one. I'm not sure if that's the one. Oh, Pierre Villar, History of Gold and Money. But what's interesting about that is all the conquistadors and all the actual soldiers that came over were indentured. Because they had to buy. They were like soldiers of fortune, but they didn't really make any money because they were all indebted to these financiers, and they had to buy all of their own weapons and armory and everything, and they were thinking it was like a business thing. They were gonna make some money and get a cut of what. But it's interesting that relationship. But I need to do more on the money thing. But my views on money are actually really complicated and evolving. But I do not support MMT at all. They're not good.
I agree. I will just say, because I was at an event at the McCarg Center at Penn. It was 2018, I think, with Naomi Klein was the keynote, and about all of that. But Stephanie Kelton was there, and I had a sense that the MMT people were not right before that, because I kept trying to engage them about impact investing and blockchain identity, and they would try to railroad me and shut me out. And eventually, I just left their group. Someone had added me to this group, but it was clear to me that they're totally connected with all of the impact space.
Yeah.
At least the leaders. I don't know if all the individual people on the ground are. But
well, they came onto the scene with a lot of resources and support. And so I was like, my red flag automatically went up. They had this huge conference. I'm like, and they were well organized and they had funding. And so that's, to me, that's a red flag. I find the most truest answers and sincerest pursuits are usually just individual people who have a passion for it. Whenever there's money and resources put into something, there's usually ulterior motives associated with it. Again, this goes back to the market thing, and it's just there are I had problems with the capitalist system before all this started. I don't just I don't have the answer either, but there are deeper fundamental questions that need to be asked about the whole enchilada. Anyway, so let's do this again. Allison, any final words?
No, I'm just thank you for joining us, and I hope tell other people for Wednesday. And seriously, like I do get feedback that people just still don't quite get what I'm talking about. So like I will try to explain it in simpler terms that people can articulate it to me, like what it is that is their sticking point. And let's try to figure out a way to come up with opportunities for sharing out this message, because I think in some respects, once you understand the facts of what is happening and how the machine works in like a nonpartisan way, just these are the mechanics of the machine. You know, the imperative of capitalist growth is that we create the metaverse and live as avatars and be like create value in that digital space. Is that what we want? Like to have these conversations? Then I think we can get somewhere. But we do need to really start to mobilize the health resistance people into these broader conversations. And I'm kind of shocked that it hasn't happened already. I know the climate piece is happening somewhat, but it's still not being framed as an impact investing frame. So yeah, so I'm going to get back to my blog. In the meantime, I would just encourage folks, if you haven't already checked out the work of my friend Steffers at A Piece of Mindful. She does really good work on nanotechnology. It's a collective blog, but her author by handle is Steffers, and also Raul Diego at Silicon Icarus has been doing amazing work too on the impact investing space. And so those are people whose content I think is really valuable. And yeah, let's keep building this thing. And many thanks to you, Jason, for hosting. And I'm glad you're feeling better.
Yeah, I'm getting there. So Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will do this again. It probably won't be as long, but yeah, thank you guys for joining us. And thank you, Allison.